Daenerys Targaryen had dreamed of conquerors' songs and triumphant processions, yet reality rarely walked in step with her grandest visions. On the day her enemies laid hands on her, there had been a hush over the battlefield so complete that the faintest breeze carried the echo of swords slipping from dying fingers. She was bound with thick rope that bit into her wrists, stripped of her queenly attire, and placed at the heart of a column of Lannister men-at-arms. They regarded her with a mixture of terror and something closer to awe, as though they could scarcely believe the silver-haired mother of dragons stood a prisoner before them. Each step forward felt heavier than any stride she had ever taken while bearing titles or crowns, for in that moment no throng of loyal, unsullied surrounded her, and her dragons were nowhere within her sight. She was alone, captured, and marched like a trophy through the war-torn countryside. She tried to lift her head high, not out of pride alone, but because she recalled a lesson learned early in her life. The moment you let your enemies see the depth of your fear, they have already begun winning. Her mind raced with possibilities. Could her followers, those who had knelt and declared her the breaker of chains, mount a rescue in time? She clung to that faint hope. She clung as well to another pressing question. What of Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion? Were they flying somewhere overhead, glimpsing her from the clouds, or had they been separated from her fully? If the Lannister men had captured her, might they have some darker plan in store for her children of fire? The sun slipped beneath distant hills, staining the sky a bruised crimson, while the troops set camp. Daenerys endured crude treatment at first, for though the men feared her, their orders were explicit: keep the Targaryen queen alive, but make certain she could not escape. They hammered a stake into the ground near the captain's tent and affixed her chains to it with a padlock. Her wrists remained bound, blood seeping where the ropes chafed raw skin. The men gave her water but withheld food, and though thirst was quenched, hunger knotted in her belly. She forced her posture straight, refused to slump against the post, refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her diminished. Hours dragged on as dusk settled into night. A few men glared at her, recalling the stories of her dragon fire scorching Lannister armies and fields. Others watched her as though she were some wondrous creature, caged for them to marvel at. She kept her face impassive and her thoughts turned inward to the lessons of her youth and the counsel of her lost friends. Think like a queen, even if you wear chains. That voice in her memory sounded sometimes like Ser Barristan's, sometimes like Yora's, and occasionally even like her own. Somewhere in the distance, a single wolf howled, a lonely call to the moon. Daenerys felt its echo deep in her bones. She barely slept that night. When dawn came, the soldiers unchained her from the stake, only to march her anew at the column's center. The roads were uneven, half-churned mud from the passage of countless armies over the years. Her feet slipped and stumbled, but she forced herself to remain steady. She saw peasants ragged in brown clothes, eyes hollow from witnessing too many battles, watching from the edges of fields. They trembled at the sight of the Lannister banners, but their gazes invariably found Daenerys, as if they recognized something in her, a rumor come to life, the fabled queen with silver hair. Yet none dared lift a finger to assist her. Fear was too old and sorrow too deep for them to stir. She thought often of the Red Keep rising in the capital like a looming fortress of cruelty and secrets. The Iron Throne sat within, and for so many moons Daenerys had thought of that seat as her birthright. Now it beckoned again, this time not as a promise of rule, but as a place of captivity. If the Lannisters had truly seized her with Cersei's knowledge, her imprisonment would not be gentle. She had heard tales of the Mad King's cruelty. She sometimes wondered if Cersei had gleaned from that madness a few twisted lessons of her own. Yet Daenerys did not yield to despair. She had led armies before. She had survived deserts and seas, betrayal and heartbreak. She had walked through fire. In her darkest hour, she reminded herself that she was no mere Westerosi noblewoman. She was Daenerys Storborn of the House Targaryen. If she lived and still drew breath, her legend would not be snuffed out so easily. On the second night, she was put under the watchful eye of a soldier named Jate, a lean man with a hawkish nose. He kept his hand on the hilt of his short sword whenever he came near her. He seemed to be measuring her with every glance, as if expecting her to burst into flames or conjure some sorcery. She spoke little, but when he finally asked if she desired water, she nodded. He brought her a skin and allowed her a few sips, though his eyes never left her face. She tried to glean information from him, but he was cautious. Still, she caught a slip of the tongue when he mentioned your dragons, the slight tremble in his voice hinting that they had not been slain. Relief flitted through her like a spark in the night. Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion might still soar free somewhere in the skies. If they remained alive and unbound, there remained hope. Word of her capture must have spread through the Lannister forces swiftly, for by the third evening she found herself confronted by a higher-ranking officer, a grizzled knight with peppered hair and a scowl pinned tight on his face. He wore no sigil openly, but the red gold of his cloak told her whose side he served. "They say you're a witch and a conqueror," he said, crossing his arms over his chest. "Yet you don't look so fearsome now." She had no energy left to argue. Instead, she studied him in silence. The knight seemed unnerved by her lack of response, and he spat upon the ground before stalking away. His was the face of thousands who had lost friends or kin in the war. Daenerys did not relish being hated, but she was too weary to fight his ignorance that night. When the troop finally neared King's Landing, the tension among the soldiers rose like a tide. They knew the capital's gaze would soon be upon them, and many of them had only rumors to anchor their expectations. Some believed she could vanish in the blink of an eye or call down Dragonfire with but a word. Daenerys sensed their fear, and she harnessed it in her mind, shaping it into a quiet determination. She might be in chains, but she was not powerless. Fear could be a weapon if wielded properly, and she had seen it turn the tide of battles. She merely needed to survive to see such a moment when opportunity broke these shackles. The city's walls reared up, a testament to centuries of expansions and renovations. The city stank of refuse and despair, but from the vantage of the road it looked imposing. The gate yawned open, revealing a dark corridor flanked by spiked metal gates. Her guardians paused, likely waiting for a signal from the watch commander. Some men cast wary glances at Daenerys, their grips tight on their weapons. Others wore triumphant smirks as if to declare that victory was indeed theirs. Daenerys, sweat-soaked and exhausted, straightened her spine one more time, refusing to appear broken. They led her inside at a slow pace, for the city's streets were clogged with onlookers. The crowd parted with gasps and murmurs. Daenerys felt their stares upon her pale hair, her tattered clothing, the cuts on her wrists. She caught fragments of whispered disbelief, excitement, and hatred. Some flung insults, but others seemed awestruck, as though they had never expected to see the Dragon Queen in the flesh. She wondered how many recognized that she had once tried to free the realm from tyranny, or if they only knew the latest rumors that she was a ravager of armies and a threat to their Lannister queen. Noise crashed around her like churning ocean waves. The city seemed to vibrate with an undercurrent of tension, as if holding its breath for the spectacle to unfold. A Lannister captain with a brassy voice barked orders. Soldiers formed a wedge to clear the path. Daenerys saw men scurry aside, women with children pressed tight against stone walls, and vendors whose stalls threatened to topple in the press of bodies. The looming keep grew nearer. She could see the spikes atop its ramparts and the banners depicting the Golden Lion of House Lannister. Somewhere behind those walls was Cersei, possibly smiling in triumph at the knowledge of Daenerys's capture. A fresh wave of anger rose in her. She recalled the devastation the Lannisters had inflicted upon countless innocents. She remembered the heartbreak she had experienced crossing the narrow sea only to find the Seven Kingdoms locked in never-ending conflicts. And now here she was, marched as if she were a curiosity from distant Essos for the capital's amusement. Within the Red Keep's courtyard, the hush was almost surreal. The great wooden doors closed behind the column of soldiers. Out of the corner of her eye, Daenerys saw the swirl of red cloaks as the guards took up positions. The captain who had barked orders at the gate now approached her, dismounting from his horse. He had a scar across his cheek and a look of grim satisfaction. "Her Grace will want to see you at once," he said. Then he gestured for the men to continue leading her forward. The architecture of the Red Keep soared overhead, a labyrinth of towers and keeps. Daenerys tried to quell the tremor in her legs as she imagined that somewhere in those corridors she would come face to face with the Lannister queen. Yet she pressed her lips together, determined not to plead or beg. As they reached the great hall, Daenerys found it both familiar and alien. She had imagined it many times, the vaulted ceiling, the stained glass windows, the massive pillars flanking the aisle, and the raised dais at its end. Seated upon the Iron Throne was the woman Daenerys had known chiefly through whispered tales and sporadic intelligence from her advisors. Cersei Lannister, draped in a black gown stitched with golden threads at the sleeves, regarded her captive with an arch expression. Her blonde hair was cropped short, but it did not diminish her aura of authority. Beside her stood Qyburn, hands folded in front of him like a kindly maester, though Daenerys knew better than to trust that guise. A handful of other courtiers and guards formed a quiet ring around them. Torches burned along the walls, lending the air a smoky haze that made Cersei's eyes glint dangerously. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Daenerys held her head high, though her arms still bore the weight of chains and the manacles on her wrists had torn the skin raw. Cersei's gaze flicked over the prisoner's state, lingering on the dirty smudges on Daenerys's face and the rope-burnt wrists. Then her mouth curved into a small, wintry smile. "We have heard so much about the famed Mother of Dragons." Her voice sounded strangely soft in the vast chamber. "And yet here she is, caged and collared. An unusual sight indeed." Daenerys steadied her breath. She would not be baited into rash words. But her silence seemed to amuse the queen. "No clever remarks?" Cersei continued. "No protestations of innocence or claims of rightful rulership? Is the silver-haired Targaryen who burned so many Lannister soldiers at last struck dumb?" "I'll speak when I choose," Daenerys replied, each word measured. Her voice echoed in the hall. Cersei's eyes narrowed for the briefest heartbeat. Then she let out a laugh that echoed with genuine amusement. "Very well. We'll see how far your resolve carries you when you stand trial for your crimes. For now, we'll arrange accommodations befitting your station as a prisoner of the crown. And if you find yourself with an appetite, I imagine the dungeons will provide quite the unique dining experience." At that she rose, the heavy skirts of her gown brushing the floor. She waved a hand, dismissing the guards and the onlookers as if the matter were hardly worth more of her time. Daenerys was led away before she could utter another word, not that she had any illusions about what else there was to say. She had expected cruelty, and Cersei had shown a hint of it, but she also sensed calculation behind those eyes. For the moment, Daenerys would be spirited down to the bowels of the Red Keep, and she could do nothing to prevent it. She told herself, endure, survive, plan. If she was alive, she could still seek a way out. The dungeons beneath the Red Keep were even less welcoming than she had feared. Damp, cold air clung to the rough-hewn walls, and the torchlight revealed scurrying rats that vanished between broken stones. A single cell door opened, and the guard shoved Daenerys inside. She stumbled but caught herself, then turned to watch them seal the heavy iron-bound door with a clang. Footsteps receded, leaving her in near darkness. A single torch bracketed on the wall outside her cell offered meager illumination, casting dancing shadows across the jagged floor. She blinked, adjusting to the gloom, and let out a slow breath. The cell's stone bench was her only seat. The smell of mildew was thick, and the memory of her time lost in the red waste flitted through her mind. Another dark moment survived. So, too, would she survive this if she kept her wits? The hours blended in the darkness. She tried to gather her thoughts, to piece together any plan. Dropping her gaze to her manacles, she wondered if they could be picked or forced. But she lacked the tools or the strength to do so just yet. Her stomach growled in protest, reminding her she had eaten little in days. She thought of Grey Worm, Missandei, Tyrion, all the allies who might risk their lives to save her. Yet if Cersei had orchestrated her capture, then any rescue attempt would be fraught with peril. The slightest misstep would see them all thrown into these same cells or worse. Daenerys closed her eyes, letting her back rest against the damp wall. She pictured her dragons free in the sky, searching for her. She had once shared a bond with them that transcended words, especially with Drogon. Perhaps they sensed her absence, her captivity, and soared nearer with every passing day. That hope, faint but unwavering, was the only warmth in the dungeon's chill. Time plodded forward. Now and again she heard footsteps echo in the corridor. She readied herself, hoping one such visit might be friend rather than foe, but each time the clang of armor or the creak of a door rattled down the dark halls and faded away. Eventually, a guard brought stale bread and a cup of water, pushing them through an opening at the bottom of the iron bars. She tried to glean some morsel of information. "Where am I to be taken next?" she asked. The guard only grunted and stomped off, offering no reply. She sipped water to ease her parched throat and nibbled the bread, swallowing despite the dryness. Her mind drifted to how many captives had languished here, lost to the world in these same corridors. But she was not just another captive, she reminded herself. She had the blood of the dragon in her veins. She lost track of how many days passed in that unchanging gloom. The only measure of time was the guard's sporadic deliveries of meager meals. Her muscles ached from sleeping hunched on the bench, and her wrists scabbed where the manacles bit. She grew weaker, but her spirit refused to wither. Each hour, she shaped silent prayers to the gods, to the memory of her forebears, and especially to her own will. She recalled the unspeakable suffering she had already conquered in her life. Everything from her brother's cruelty to the Dothraki's harsh initiation, from the death of loved ones to the slaver's barbarity. She had survived it all, and she would survive this. At last, a different set of footsteps disturbed her solitude. An officer of the Lannisters, clad in a red cloak pinned with a golden lion brooch, unlocked her cell. "Her Grace wishes to speak with you," he said. She rose, biting back the pain in her muscles, and followed him along the damp corridor. He half escorted, half marched her up winding stairs, past flickering torches and through a labyrinth of stone passages. Eventually, they emerged into a large, well-lit chamber. The transition from darkness to brightness momentarily dazzled her eyes. When her vision cleared, she saw Cersei again, seated at the head of a long table. 2 guards flanked the queen, and Qyburn stood to her right with a polite, vaguely curious expression. "You look half dead," Cersei said, arching a brow. "I suppose the dungeons are hardly a place for a princess of such lofty birth." Daenerys tried to ignore the exhaustion pulling at her every limb. "Does it please you to keep me rotting in the dark? Or do you have some grander scheme?" Cersei tapped a fingernail against the surface of the table. "Sass. Well, you are a Targaryen, after all. But let us talk plainly, shall we?" She motioned to a guard. He stepped forward, and Daenerys braced herself. Instead of striking her, the guard removed her manacles. Her wrists felt like leaden weights as fresh air touched the broken skin. For a moment, the relief was enough to make her inhale sharply. Cersei observed her reaction with a ghost of a smirk. "I've decided," Cersei went on, "that the kingdom needs a display of justice, Lannister justice. You cannot be allowed to remain a rallying figure for enemies of the crown. Yet I also recognize the value in letting you live, at least for the moment. A public trial. That is how I shall show the realm that the Dragon Queen is but a mortal woman like any other, capable of error and crime." She paused, letting the idea hang. "I expect it will be quite the spectacle. People will flock from all corners to see you, to jeer or cheer. Then, once the sentence is passed, they will witness that no one is above the law. Not even a Targaryen with her monstrous beasts." Daenerys's blood roiled at the mention of her dragons as monstrous beasts. She kept her voice steady. "And what do you intend to do with my children?" Cersei's mouth curved into a cruel smile. "Your children? Forgive me if I find the term inappropriate. If they appear anywhere near the city, they'll be met with scorpions and fire. You've seen what my men can do when properly motivated. But if you must know, there's been no sign of your precious creatures. Perhaps they have abandoned you, or perhaps they circle the outskirts, waiting in vain. In either case, we are prepared." She let the statement hang there, delivering a final blow to Daenerys's confidence. Daenerys tried not to let her panic show. She still believed in the bond between her and her dragons. They would never abandon her. But every day spent in captivity was a day where they might risk themselves in fruitless search. The danger weighed heavily on her heart. "You want a public trial," Daenerys said. "You want to display me for your advantage. Why tell me this now?" Cersei stood from her seat, the folds of her gown shifting like black waves. "Because you deserve to know what awaits you. Because I want you to reflect on all the men you slew who wore my colors, on every field you burned and every house you threatened. And because," here she leaned forward slightly, "I enjoy seeing you squirm. A Targaryen brought so low is no small feat." Daenerys clenched her jaw, letting silence be her shield once more. Cersei motioned to the guard to remove her from the room, and Daenerys found herself escorted back through the winding corridors, but not to the dungeons this time. Instead, they brought her to a tower cell. It was small, with a narrow bed and a single window that overlooked the city, but it was a marked improvement from the subterranean gloom. The guards left her there, alone. She moved to the window, inhaling the fresher air, though it was tinged with the stench of King's Landing below. The sun was bright overhead, and she squinted to make out the muddy ribbons of the Blackwater rush. Thoughts of the trial twisted in her mind. She could imagine the uproar, the manipulations, the attempts to paint her as a monster. The Targaryen name was easily tainted in the eyes of Westeros after the madness that had come before her. But she refused to let them reduce her to a sideshow. She was determined to maintain her dignity and to escape if such a chance presented itself. Night came and went, and each passing day in that tower cell bled together. Sometimes a guard brought her watery soup or stale bread. Other times she endured hunger for stretches that felt endless. She remained under constant vigilance. The door was locked and 2 sentries stood outside at all times. Yet compared to the dungeon, she at least had a scrap of comfort and a small measure of light. She spent time pacing the length of the cell, testing the walls, the floor, the narrow window. She tried pushing against the bars, but they held firm. The drop below was too great, and there was no question of climbing. There would be no easy flight from the Red Keep's towers. About a fortnight into her captivity, Daenerys was jolted awake by a sudden commotion in the corridor. She caught the glint of steel under torchlight in the gap beneath her door. Voices rose in angry hushes, then the door swung open. A slender figure slipped inside and snapped it shut behind him. He wore a simple brown cloak over fine garments. It was Tyrion Lannister, breathing hard, his mismatched eyes darting to the edges of the room before resting on Daenerys. She stood quickly, hard-hammering. "Your Grace," he whispered. "I feared I'd never get this chance." She could hardly believe her eyes. "Tyrion," she breathed. Are you alone?" He held up a hand, cautioning her to keep her voice down. "There isn't much time. A distraction was arranged. I had a few old contacts in the city who still remember how to slip into the keep unseen. The guards at your door won't stay preoccupied forever. I came to see if you're well and if we might attempt something to free you." Daenerys felt hope spark in her chest for the first time in weeks. "I knew you wouldn't abandon me," she said, voice trembling with gratitude. "Where are the others? Where's Grey Worm or any of the Unsullied?" He shook his head sadly. "Scattered. Many died in that ambush. Grey Worm survived. He's rallying the remaining Unsullied, gathering allies where he can, but it's not enough yet. Cersei still commands the city and her hold is tightening. She's announced a grand trial in 2 weeks' time in the Dragon Pit of all places. Her plan is to show you in chains, humiliate you, and likely stage a very public execution. She wants to break the Targaryen mystique once and for all." Daenerys' stomach twisted. The Dragon Pit, a place that had once housed her ancestors' dragons, now likely to be the site of her condemnation. "Tyrion," she said, stepping closer, "can we escape before then? If you have a route—" He shook his head again. "We need more men or a cunning plan. As it is, I barely slipped in here alone, and I'm not sure I can lead you out past all those guards. But I have a plan in the works. We will need to be patient, which I know is the cruelest demand I can make of you. I needed to see for myself that you hadn't lost your resolve. There are some in the city, quiet loyalists, who might help. They've heard your words, some from your time distributing food, others from your earlier attempts to show mercy to city dwellers. They don't buy the Lannister propaganda. More crucially, I've heard the faintest rumor that one of your dragons was spotted far to the north, near the Rose Road. It's not confirmation, but at least they're alive." Her eyes burned with both relief and worry. "If they come too close, scorpions could wound them. We must find a safer way." He nodded. "Precisely. My plan, if all goes well, will align your supporters, distract the Lannister forces, and perhaps lead to an opening. But we must time it carefully, likely on the day of the trial itself, when everyone's attention is at the Dragon Pit. Grey Worm might attempt a coordinated strike from outside the city. If we can sow enough chaos, we might spirit you away, or you might rally your dragons to your side if they respond to you in that moment. It's all risk, all slender threads." He took a shaky breath. "But better than nothing, yes?" Daenerys clasped his hands in hers, ignoring the stale breadcrumbs and bruises on her wrists. "Yes. Thank you, my friend. I trust you." Tyrion gave a small, sad smile. "I will not fail you again." He glanced at the door, hearing footsteps approach. "I must go. Do not lose faith. We'll see this done." Then he slipped out, closing the door swiftly behind him. Moments later, the guard returned to his post, none the wiser. For the first time since her capture, Daenerys felt genuine fire in her veins. She had an ally on the inside. Plans were afoot. She forced herself to endure the passing days, once again counting them in meager meals and the shifting light through her narrow window. Her mind played over possible scenarios of escape. Could the dragons sense her presence in the city on the day of the trial? Could she lure them to the Dragon Pit? Would the city be set ablaze in the process? She prayed it would not come to that. She remembered the devastation of past battles. But in captivity, her choices were few. She clung to Tyrion's promise and silently prepared herself for the moment to strike. At last, the day of the trial arrived. The dawn was gray and overcast, as though the very sky felt the tension. The guards came early, forcing Daenerys into manacles once more and marching her through the corridors. The hush in the Red Keep was broken only by the echo of their footsteps. Outside, the city buzzed with anticipation. Vendors hawked wares, and crowds clogged the streets, all eager to witness the downfall of the Mad King's daughter. Daenerys felt the venom in the air. She tried to fortify her spirit with the knowledge that Tyrion lurked among them, orchestrating something. If nothing else, Grey Worm was out there doing what he could. She was not alone. They led her to the Dragon Pit, once a grand structure. Now it was half in ruins, its dome shattered from wars long past, the massive space open to the sky. The stands had been cleared, and in their place, makeshift seating was arranged for lords, ladies, and city officials. Common folk clustered around the perimeter, pressed up against wooden barriers. At the far side of the pit sat an elevated platform with a throne-like chair for Cersei. Beside it stood a small dais for witnesses. Armed guards stood in ranks, forming a ring of steel. Daenerys's heart pounded, recalling that this place had once housed her ancestors' dragons. Now it was repurposed to snuff out her claim, her life. The crowd erupted into jeers, gasps, and a smattering of cheers as the Lannister guards marched Daenerys forward. Some hurled fruit or stones. Most fell short, but she felt a bruising impact against her shoulder, flinching at the sting. She kept her head high, refusing to be cowed. She glimpsed Cersei's triumphant expression as the queen rose. Qyburn, standing just behind her, read out a list of charges: treason, murder, conspiracy, and use of unnatural forces, the dragons. Daenerys barely listened to the litany. Instead, her gaze swept the stands, seeking Tyrion's face among the throng. She found no sign of him, no sign of her allies. A cold trickle of dread slid down her spine. Had something gone wrong? Cersei gestured for silence, and the crowd complied grudgingly, the hush broken by only a handful of murmurs. Daenerys Targaryen, Cersei pronounced, you stand accused of countless crimes against the realm. How do you plead? Daenerys felt all eyes upon her. She inhaled, letting her voice carry. I am guilty of defending the enslaved and punishing those who would burn the innocent. If that is the crime, then I plead guilty. The hush rippled with tension. Cersei's lips thinned. So you do not deny burning Lannister forces on the battlefield? Or slaying those who would not bend the knee? Daenerys squared her shoulders. I do not deny defending myself against those who came to kill me and my people. The Lannisters do not hold a monopoly on righteousness. I came here believing I could liberate the realm from tyranny. That was my only goal. A roar went up in the crowd, some jeering, some momentarily taken by her words. Cersei raised a hand to quiet them. You see, she said, addressing the assembly. She does not deny her brutality. The line of House Targaryen, tainted by madness, remains a scourge upon our land. Daenerys felt her fury rising. Her chance would come. She half expected to hear the beating of leathery wings overhead, but the skies remained bleak and empty. Where was Tyrion's promised plan? Did he mean to strike once the sentence was pronounced? A bead of sweat formed at her temple, though the air was cool. Cersei raised her voice again. Daenerys Targaryen, I, Cersei of the House Lannister, Queen of the Undulls and the First Men, sentence you to death. The method shall be determined by the crown at a time of my choosing. Suddenly, a commotion broke out near one of the entrances to the dragon pit. A dozen men in hoods rushed forward, knocking aside guards. Crossbow bolts flew, burying themselves in the dusty ground or tangling in cloaks. The crowd screamed and scattered. Daenerys's pulse soared. Could this be Tyrion's doing? She saw the swirl of chaos as guards hustled forward, weapons raised. Cersei stood abruptly, shouting commands, but the words were lost in the uproar. Daenerys felt a guard's grip on her arm slacken as he turned to face the new threat. Before her, a sword flashed. She ducked, stumbling back. In the madness, she saw a hooded figure slash the chain connecting her manacles and hiss, run. That voice, it was Missandei's. Shock and elation flooded Daenerys. She had thought Missandei might still be with Grey Worm, out of reach. But here she was, at great risk, cutting Daenerys's bonds. Daenerys's wrists were still chafed, but the chain was severed, giving her arms freedom of movement. She seized the moment, surging to her feet, ignoring the jolt of pain in her ankles. The crowd was in wild disarray. Some had formed a small ring to fend off Lannister soldiers, and she glimpsed Grey Worm's distinctive helmet among them. She dashed toward that cluster, Missandei at her side. Two Lannister guards tried to intercept her, but Grey Worm thrust a spear, striking one down. Another fighter, face concealed, parried the second guard's sword. Tyrion? Possibly. Daenerys wasted no time. She joined them, heart-drumming. The small band of rescuers pressed toward the dragon pit's exit, an old passage near the back. Daenerys recalled hearing once that the Targaryen kings had built hidden ways in and out of this complex. If Tyrion had discovered one of them, it could be their route to temporary safety. The ring of steel pressed closer as more Lannister reinforcements poured in. Daenerys spotted the glint of gold cloaks, the city watch. The chaos escalated, people screaming, smoke swirling where a lantern had shattered. She crouched low, weaving through the swirling dust. Missandei clung to her side. Grey Worm blocked another blade, expression grim. The clamor of the crowd was deafening. Another rescue fighter dropped, struck by a crossbow bolt. Daenerys forced down her horror. They had come to save her, and every breath of freedom she drew was paid for by their courage. She prayed it would not be in vain. At last, they reached the far end of the pit where half-broken pillars and rubble formed a partial barrier. Grey Worm and another man, revealed now to be Ser Jorah Mormont, heaved a chunk of stone aside, revealing a concealed aperture in the wall. Daenerys's heart twisted at the sight of Jorah. She had once believed he would never return to her side, but here he was, exhausted and battered, risking everything. She spared no time for words, only gratitude in her eyes as she ducked through the gap. The space beyond was a narrow tunnel half-choked with debris. They hurried down its length, the air thick with dust. Behind them, angry shouts echoed. Daenerys tasted freedom like a tang of metal on her tongue. When they emerged into the open again, she found herself near the base of Rhaenys' hill, the dragonpit looming behind. The city spread out beyond, a warren of streets and alleyways. Panicked onlookers ran in all directions, uncertain of the danger. Grey Worm guided Daenerys along a winding route with Missandei and Jorah at their flank, and Tyrion's voice hissed from behind, "Hurry." Indeed, it was Tyrion, panting and limping but very much alive. The rest of their rescuers, those who had survived, broke off to create confusion and draw the Lannister pursuit in other directions. A line of gold-cloaked watchmen spotted them, but Jorah charged forward with a fury that made Daenerys' heart lurch. The Watchers wavered, unprepared for the onslaught. Grey Worm joined in, dispatching them swiftly. Blood stained the cobblestones, and Daenerys swallowed the bile rising in her throat. This was her rescue, brutal and desperate. The city might soon be embroiled in full-scale fighting if the Lannisters roused their forces. She wondered if Cersei had given an order yet, or if the Queen herself was in disarray after that fiasco. In any case, each moment was precious. They sprinted deeper into the labyrinth of alleys, seeking an agreed-upon safe house. Tyrion took the lead, guiding them around corners until they reached a shabby, unassuming building with boarded windows. Inside, a few men and women stood, rummaging for weapons or supplies. They startled at the group's sudden entrance. Then one recognized Daenerys, bowing awkwardly. "Your Grace," he murmured. Daenerys thanked him in a tired voice, stepping aside so that the others could barricade the door behind them. She turned to her rescuers, her dear companions. Missandei's eyes shimmered with tears, and she clasped Daenerys' hand. "We thought we had lost you," Missandei whispered. Daenerys brushed her friend's cheek. "No. You saved me. All of you." She found herself at a loss for further words, the magnitude of her gratitude overwhelming. Grey Worm removed his helmet, revealing a sheen of sweat on his brow. "We waited for the right moment. Ser Tyrion said the trial would be the best chance to strike." Tyrion took a shaky seat on a crate. "Yes, though I worried we'd be skewered the moment we tried. We lost good people out there." He ran a hand through his hair, clearly shaken. "Cersei won't rest. She'll turn the city inside out, hunting for you." Daenerys nodded, her mind racing. "Then we must flee King's Landing as soon as possible." Jorah leaned against the wall, hand pressed to a wound in his side. "There are plans to slip you onto a ship that waits at the harbor beyond the city walls. But it'll be guarded heavily. We need a diversion or a guide through some hidden route." Tyrion considered their options, then turned to Daenerys. "I've made certain arrangements, but they hinge on the possibility that your dragons might respond to you if you call them, even from a distance." Daenerys felt a jolt of renewed strength. "If they are near, they will come. Drogon most of all. But I fear for their safety if they face the city's scorpions. We could spark another war." Missandei's eyes shone. "Perhaps war is unavoidable now. Not by your choice, but by theirs. Cersei demanded it the moment she captured you." Grey Worm nodded in agreement, though his expression was grim. "She leaves us no choice. But we must do it swiftly before she can close off every escape from the city." They huddled together to form a plan. The goal: slip Daenerys past the city walls into open fields where Drogon or another dragon might meet her without the bristling scorpion lines. Tyrion had a smuggler contact who knew a route from Flea Bottom's outskirts to a sewer passage that led beyond the walls. If they could make it that far, they might break free. Gathering the remnants of allies, some ex-soldiers of the Unsullied, a handful of freedmen who had remained loyal to the Targaryen cause, and a few mercenaries paid by Tyrion, they would attempt a nighttime escape. The hours leading up to it were tense, each minute stretching. Daenerys and her friends remained in the safe house, hearing the sounds of Lannister patrols clattering in the streets. A single mistake, a single cough in the wrong moment could bring them all to ruin. Night fell at last, a cloak of darkness they hoped to use to their advantage. Dressed in humble cloaks, the group set out on foot, dividing into smaller segments to avoid drawing attention. Daenerys stuck close to Grey Worm and Missandei, with Tyrion forging ahead to negotiate each checkpoint. Jorah, despite his injury, was determined to stay near Daenerys, limping along with sword in hand. The city seemed to seethe under the waxing moon. Whispers of the fiasco at the Dragonpit had already spread, each rumor wilder than the last. Some claimed Daenerys commanded an army of sorcerers. Others insisted she had turned into a dragon herself and flown away. The uncertainty and fear were enough to keep most citizens indoors. Still, Lannister patrols prowled the main avenues, torches held high. Tyrion guided them down twisting alleys, away from the main roads. Flea Bottom's reek was pungent, stale waste, rotted food, desperation. Ragged shadows slunk away at their approach. At one junction, a group of Lannister guards blocked the path, scanning passers-by. Tyrion cursed under his breath. They ducked into a narrow side alley, waiting behind crates as the patrol's torches flickered by. Daenerys' heart thundered with each passing footstep. She dreaded the moment one of those torches might swing their way, exposing them. Her hand found Missandei's, squeezing with silent fear. At last, the patrol moved on. They pressed forward. After what felt like hours of winding through labyrinthine streets, they reached an abandoned building that seemed half-collapsed. Tyrion signaled them to enter. Inside, a pile of rubble concealed a hole in the floor that, upon closer inspection, led to an ancient tunnel. The stench from below was vile enough to make Daenerys gag. Sewers! But if it meant freedom, she would crawl through them. One by one, they descended, gripping torches to light the way. The tunnel was a cramped, dripping passage, the walls coated in slime. Rats squeaked in the darkness, disturbed by their presence. Grey Worm helped Daenerys navigate the slippery stones. Tyrion led the way with the surety of a man who had studied a map thoroughly. They trudged for what seemed an eternity, ankles caked in filth and water. But gradually, the stench lessened and fresh air teased their nostrils. They turned a final corner to find a rusted iron grate. Tyrion and Grey Worm set to work prying it loose. It shrieked in protest, echoing in the confined space, but they managed to free it. Beyond the grate lay a small waterway that emptied into a dark moat beneath the city walls. The open sky stretched overhead, dotted with stars. Daenerys almost wept with relief at the sight of it. They slipped out, water rising to their kn. The current was not strong, but it was enough to hamper swift movement. Carefully, quietly, they waded toward a bank overshadowed by willow trees. Once on dry land, they took a moment to breathe. The city walls loomed behind them. They had done it, escaped King's Landing. Yet the danger was hardly past. As soon as Cersei discovered the route, she might send men to hunt them across the fields. No matter. The first step was done. Tyrion pointed west. A league from here, there is a small rise. We'll make for that vantage point. If your dragon responds, that might be the place to call him. The journey across open fields felt fraught, each new clearing an exposed vulnerability. The moon lit their way but also rendered them visible if any patrol ventured out. Daenerys' heart climbed into her throat with each rustle of grass. But as minutes passed into an hour, no horns sounded behind them, no hoofbeats thundered closer. Perhaps Cersei was still sealing the city, unaware they were already beyond the walls. At the base of the low hill, they paused. Tyrion and the rest spread out in a protective formation. Daenerys, breath quivering, climbed to the crest with Grey Worm and Missandei. The night air was cool, carrying scents of grass and distant pine. She closed her eyes, summoning the raw presence that sometimes ignited in her chest when she reached for her dragons. She exhaled, letting a single word slip from her lips, carried on the wind like a plea, Drogon. The darkness offered no immediate answer. She tried again, voice stronger this time. Drogon. The night was vast, indifferent. She sensed movement behind her, Grey Worm scanning the horizon, Jorah leaning on his sword, Tyrion standing tensely. Her own heart pounded. What if the dragons were too far? What if they had been wounded or captured? She called again and again, summoning the fire in her blood. Time stretched. A hush blanketed the field. She felt tears prick her eyes. Then, a sound at the very edge of hearing, a whoosh of air, faint at first. She held her breath, scarcely daring to hope. The wind picked up and with it came a low, thunderous beat. Daenerys' heart soared as she saw a massive shape pass across the moon. Drogon. He roared, a sound that rent the silence, sending flocks of sleeping birds into the night air. Daenerys exhaled a sob of relief, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her child had come for her. The great black dragon descended with a gust of wind that flattened grass. Grey Worm and the others stumbled back in awe as Drogon's immense bulk settled upon the hillside. His scales shimmered with an ebony sheen under the moonlight, his eyes burning crimson. He lowered his head, sniffing at Daenerys. She pressed her forehead against his snout, letting the warmth of his breath wash over her. "You found me," she whispered, tears leaving tracks in the grime on her face. "You found me, my sweet." The moment was both joyous and fraught with peril. Daenerys knew that if the Lannisters came upon them now, Drogon would defend her, unleashing the same devastating fire that had scorched many a battlefield. She did not want more death, but she would fight if forced. Tyrion approached tentatively, followed by the others. Drogon hissed, wary, but Daenerys murmured softly to calm him. Then she turned to Tyrion. "We must hurry. We can still fly from here, perhaps to meet with any remaining unsullied forces in a safer location." Tyrion exhaled in relief at the sight of the beast. "Yes," he said. "We can rally your troops. We can regroup. Then we decide our next move against Cersei." Daenerys turned to Grey Worm and Yora, scanning their faces. "Are you coming with me? There may not be room for everyone on Drogon, but—" Grey Worm shook his head slowly, though longing shone in his gaze. "I must gather those still loyal, keep them safe. If we all fly, we leave them behind." Yora nodded. "I can help him lead. You need to be the symbol they rally to, Your Grace, but from a place of safety so that you can call upon them when the time is right." Tyrion raised a hand. "I'll go with you if I may. We'll find a secure spot to regroup. You'll need counsel to chart your next steps." Daenerys' heart twisted. She wanted them all to come, but practicality demanded they split. Her small rescue band had valiantly saved her, but if they clustered around Drogon, the beast might be overloaded. And she needed eyes and ears on the ground, men who could continue the work of subverting Cersei's power. The knowledge weighed heavily on her. This was the reality of war, of leadership. She took Yora's hand in hers, gazing into his eyes. "Be safe, my sweet knight." His voice was hoarse. "And you, my queen. I will find you again. That's a promise." She drew Grey Worm into a quick embrace. "Thank you, my brave commander. Protect them. We will return for you." He nodded, solemn and fierce. "My life for yours." Missandei looked torn. She cast a glance at Yora and Grey Worm, then at Daenerys. "If you need me, I will come with you, Your Grace. But perhaps I am of more use here, helping them gather the freed people. My words might reassure them." Daenerys let out a soft sigh. She longed for Missandei's gentle wisdom by her side, but again, logic spoke. "Very well," she said, hugging her friend close. "Stay safe." With the decision made, Daenerys and Tyrion prepared to mount Drogon. The dragon shifted restlessly, wings flaring in the moonlight. Tyrion eyed the monstrous creature with a mixture of awe and trepidation. "I must be out of my mind," he muttered, then placed a hand on the scaled flank to hoist himself up. Daenerys followed with a practiced movement, swinging onto Drogon's back. The beast rumbled, shifting his weight as Daenerys wrapped an arm around Tyrion's waist to steady him. She leaned forward, murmuring soothing words into Drogon's ear. He growled, but his wings unfurled with a snap. Yora, Missandei, and Grey Worm backed away, giving them space. Daenerys cast one final look at her dearest friends, imprinting their faces into her memory. Then she called out, "Fly, Drogon." The dragon roared, muscles bunching, and leaped into the sky with a powerful thrust. The rush of wind tore at Daenerys' hair. Tyrion clung tight, face pale, as Drogon climbed higher. Below, the figures of her companions dwindled. The city walls of King's Landing spread like a black spiderweb. Above, the moon cast a silver sheen across the dragon's wings. Daenerys felt her heart soar with a fierce joy she had almost forgotten. She was free. They flew east, away from the main roads. The chill night air stung their faces, and Daenerys kept one hand on Tyrion to ensure he didn't slide off. She guided Drogon as best she could, searching for a safe area to land, somewhere distant from prying eyes. Over hills and fields they swept, the city behind them receding like a nightmare left behind in the darkness. At last, after a flight of perhaps an hour, exhausting for Tyrion but a mere warm-up for Drogon, they descended in a wooded glen near a meandering stream. Drogon landed with a swirl of leaves and a soft hiss, lowering his body so that his riders could slide off. Tyrion half collapsed onto the ground, breathing hard. "Remind me never to do that again," he gasped, though a hint of exhilaration sparkled in his mismatched eyes. Daenerys stroked Drogon's flank, feeling the powerful muscles beneath his scales. She whispered words of gratitude, praising him for finding her. He nosed her shoulder, a gesture of affection that made her heart ache with love for the creature who was both child and ally. They made a small camp beneath the cover of trees, mindful of any watchers or roving Lannister patrols. Tyrion eventually found his breath, dusted himself off, and stared at Daenerys with a sober expression. "You realize," he said, voice low, "that Cersei will never stop hunting you now. She'll see your escape as an act of war. She'll rally all resources to recapture or kill you." Daenerys knelt, scooping cool water in her palms from the stream. She drank deeply, feeling life flow into her parched body. "She can try," she said at length, "but she has only hardened my resolve. I came to Westeros to break the wheel of tyranny. If she will not yield, then we must break her hold on the realm." Tyrion exhaled slowly. "War then? Another war. The people will suffer." Daenerys felt the weight of that truth like a stone in her chest. "I know. But if we do nothing, they remain under her heel. We must be wise in how we fight. I will not become what my father was." He studied her face in the moonlight, nodding in understanding. "We'll gather allies, old and new. We'll treat with those who see what Cersei truly is. And we'll do our best to protect the innocent. You have me by your side for what that's worth." She smiled faintly. "It is worth everything, Tyrion." Then she looked toward Drogon, who prowled the perimeter, sniffing the air. "But first, we must find a place to marshal our strength to recover." In the days that followed, Daenerys and Tyrion traveled the countryside with Drogon soaring overhead. They found small pockets of loyalists who had fled the city after the fiasco at the Dragon Pit. Some men who had once been small folk, freed slaves, or sellswords who admired the Dragon Queen. News traveled slowly through the realm that Daenerys Targaryen had escaped Cersei's clutches and lived to fight another day. For every peasant who recoiled in fear of dragons, another recalled how she had broken chains in Essos, feeding the hungry and punishing the wicked. Gradually, a new camp formed, a ragtag gathering of men and women willing to stand against the Lannisters. It was nowhere near the size of the grand army Daenerys had once commanded, but it was a spark. And a spark, Daenerys knew, could light a mighty blaze. From their makeshift camp in a hidden valley, some leagues to the south of King's Landing, they plotted. Messages were sent by riders or ravens, seeking out old allies or forging new alliances with lords disgruntled by Cersei's iron rule. The days bled into weeks as Daenerys honed her patience. Each sunrise brought news, some good, some troubling. Grey Worm and Missandei remained in the capital's outskirts, quietly gathering remnants of loyal, unsullied, and forging lines of contact with the city's poor, who despised the queen that taxed them relentlessly to fund her war machine. Yora sent dispatches from further north, hinting that some lords of the Reach, once loyal to House Tyrell, might be willing to support Daenerys now that Highgarden lay in ruin and Cersei had offered them nothing but scorn. Little by little, the tapestry of rebellion began to take shape. Daenerys spent many evenings by a crackling fire, consulting with Tyrion and a handful of other advisors. Their numbers included a former knight of House Tarly who had switched loyalties, a Dornish envoy suspicious of Cersei's intentions, and a few survivors of Daenerys's original retinue who had slipped away during the disastrous ambush that led to her capture. They reviewed maps of the Crownlands, charted supply lines, and debated strategies. Tyrion often urged caution, while others pressed for a swift strike. Daenerys listened, weighing each counsel. She was determined not to let her anger overshadow reason, for that path could lead to the downfall of innocence. Yet every day, more stories of Lannister oppression reached her ears: families evicted, men conscripted by force, brutal crackdowns on suspected traitors. The old cycle of violence and power soared on, and she felt her blood burn, wanting to put an end to it. She found solace in moments with Drogon, whose presence reminded her of the destiny she once believed in so fervently. She could almost sense Rhaegal and Viserion somewhere far off. Rumors trickled in that 2 dragons had been sighted near the waters off Dragonstone. Perhaps they kept to that old stronghold, waiting for her. Daenerys wished she could gather all 3 once more, but the complexities of warfare demanded she remain near the main front. If her bond with Drogon remained strong, then so too must her vow to free the realm from those who would choke it with tyranny. As the weeks wore on, their forces swelled to a few hundred. Not a grand army, but enough to harry Lannister supply lines and launch small strikes. Daenerys insisted on personally leading one such raid when they learned that a caravan of gold and food, intended for the capital, would pass near a vulnerable stretch of road. The plan was to intercept it, depriving Cersei of crucial resources. Tyrion argued vehemently for caution. "You only just escaped her once," he pleaded. "If they capture you again, we may never recover." But Daenerys's resolve was unyielding. "I will not hide in the shadows while my people starve," she said. "We need that food more than Cersei, and if the realm sees that I stand with them, they may rally in greater numbers." Tyrion yielded to her determination, though he arranged the ambush with meticulous care, ensuring Daenerys would have cover and the swift retreat of Drogon if needed. Dawn broke on the day of the raid, revealing rolling plains dotted with scattered trees. Daenerys soared above on Drogon, scanning the horizon. Below, her small force waited behind low hills. The Lannister caravan appeared on time, perhaps 100 soldiers escorting wagons laden with supplies. Daenerys's heart pounded as she guided Drogon into a steep dive. A roar thundered across the sky, sending the caravan into panic. Arrows flew upward, but Drogon's thick scales deflected most, and Daenerys directed his flames not onto the men themselves, but in front of the wagons, blocking their path with a wall of fire. She wanted to avoid unnecessary slaughter, though she knew some among the Lannister ranks would likely die in the chaos. Her own men emerged from behind the hills, descending upon the confused guards. Steel clashed. Shouts rose. Daenerys hovered overhead, scanning for any scorpion contraption. If the Lannisters had placed one among the wagons, it could prove deadly. To her relief, she saw none. The caravans seemed ill-prepared for a dragon's assault. She guided Drogon to land behind the final wagon, cutting off its escape. Some soldiers rushed to attack, but seeing Drogon's teeth and claws, they faltered. Her men advanced, and within minutes, the Lannister lines broke. Many surrendered, tossing aside weapons. Daenerys dismounted, holding her head high, though her heart hammered with adrenaline. Tyrion, leading a ground contingent, approached. "We have it," he said breathlessly. "The wagons, the gold, and the food." A quick glance assured her that minimal blood had been spilled. Some Lannisters had died, but many more simply knelt, disarmed. Daenerys's men began organizing the captured supplies, distributing water to the exhausted prisoners. Daenerys walked among them, meeting the eyes of frightened soldiers. She remembered all too well how quickly fear could turn to hatred. She kept her voice calm as she offered them a choice: remain or go. If they pledged not to raise arms against her again, they would be allowed to return to their homes. For some, this was mercy they had never expected from the so-called Mad King's daughter. She saw relief soften their features. Others, more hardened, spat curses or glowered, but no one raised a blade. The gesture of mercy was not lost on Tyrion or the watching men. In that moment, Daenerys hoped she was forging a different legacy than that of her father. They retreated with the wagons to a safer location, ensuring the spoils would aid their cause. The success of that raid emboldened her followers, and new recruits trickled in, intrigued by the stories of a queen who rode dragons, yet showed mercy to her foes. Bit by bit, Daenerys felt momentum shifting. Cersei's hold on the capital might remain formidable, but cracks were forming. The realm was large, and not everyone bowed easily to the lion's roar. In her darkest hours, though, Daenerys recalled her capture. The moment she had felt the ropes biting her wrists, the sense of utter defeat. That memory kept her vigilant. If she faltered or grew careless, Cersei would do far worse than chain her. She would end Daenerys's quest permanently. And so Daenerys continued forging alliances, careful to protect her people, determined never again to be taken unawares. Months passed in a tapestry of raids, negotiations, and covert organizing. Daenerys never fully regained the grand army she had once commanded, but what she had now was a core of dedicated souls. People who believed in her cause because they had witnessed her convictions firsthand. When at last the time came to make a decisive move against the capital, she did not do so in a fury of dragonfire that would incinerate thousands of innocents. Instead, she struck at the supply lines, capturing key roads and forcing Cersei to draw her forces outside the city walls. It was a delicate dance, with Tyrion orchestrating deceptions and feints to minimize casualties. Finally, on a cool autumn morning, Daenerys found herself gazing upon King's Landing from afar, the banners of the lion still visible upon the ramparts. She had come full circle. Here, she had once been dragged in chains, paraded before the city like a trophy. Now, she had returned not as a prisoner but as the leader of a liberation army. The city's gates were closed, the walls bristling with scorpions, but Cersei's hold had been weakened by the constant drain of resources and the swelling discontent among the populace. Daenerys turned to her companions, Tyrion, Grey Worm, Missandei, Yora, and the others who had gathered. "This will not be a simple siege," she told them. "We must balance our strength with caution for the innocents within those walls. I have no desire to turn the city into a funeral pyre." She recalled the guilt and sorrow she had felt after battles that left behind scorched fields and too many dead. Today would be different. That same day, she soared over the city with Drogon, unleashing controlled bursts of fire on the outer defenses. The scorpion bolts whizzed past, some perilously close, but Daenerys maneuvered with fierce determination, trusting in her bond with her dragon. Her forces pressed the gates from land, forging a path. At last, the gates groaned, and a portion of the walls collapsed under the onslaught. Lannister soldiers inside faltered. Many surrendered outright, their faith in Cersei's cause eroded by hunger, late wages, and the rumor of a dragon queen who spared her enemies. Within the city, chaos reigned for a time. Daenerys refused to let it devolve into butchery. She ordered her men to maintain discipline, to protect civilians wherever possible. She knew that pockets of Lannister loyalists would fight to the bitter end. And so they did. Some Goldcloaks tried to barricade streets, others launched desperate attacks. But a hush fell over much of the city when Drogon soared low, letting loose a roar that rattled every window. Daenerys urged the defenders to lay down their arms, offering them a chance to avoid senseless slaughter. One by one, the barricades fell. Eventually, they reached the Red Keep. Once again, Daenerys found herself standing in the courtyard. The memory of her captivity seared her mind, fueling her resolve. Tyrion and Grey Worm flanked her as they approached the doors. Cersei's red-clad guards formed a last line of defense. But their formation was unsteady, morale shattered by the widespread collapse of the city's defenses. Qyburn stood among them, face pale, clutching a crossbow as if it were a talisman. Cersei herself appeared atop a flight of stairs, regal and unbroken in posture even now. "Dean," he said, in a tone that managed to be both wry and respectful. "You look as if you've had a good morning. Meanwhile, I've got half the city demanding I fund their roads and bridges without raising new taxes. Care to conjure some gold from your wine cup?" "Sadly, I have no such magic," Tyrion replied. "But I can tell you that the impetus for better roads is real. The city's trade depends on them." Bronn shrugged. I'm aware. But the crown's coffers are stable, not overflowing. We've only just started turning a profit from the reopened ports. We might need to impose a small levy, at least for merchant caravans." Tyrion's lips pursed as he weighed the idea. An import toll or a caravan levy could work if it's modest. So we don't discourage trade entirely. Let's discuss it at the next small council session. In the meantime, do your best to shift some funds around. Perhaps the extra from the shipping tariffs can cover a portion of the roads. Bronn sighed, relenting. "Very well, I'll see what can be done. Just remember, if people start grumbling about taxes, you're the one who'll hear about it first." Tyrion gave him a faint smile. "I'm quite used to being grumbled at by now, but do keep me informed." He nodded to the scribe, who bowed nervously, and the pair continued on their way, leaving Tyrion to follow at a slower pace. He passed down a corridor that led to one of the many new wings under renovation. Workers were busy restoring a wide gallery, perched high above the courtyard. Scaffolding rose along the walls, and carpenters hammered away at wooden frames. Tyrion watched them for a moment, marveling at how the city's laborers had thrown themselves into the rebuilding. These men and women, some from as far away as the Westerlands or the Stormlands, had come to King's Landing not only for wages but to be part of something transformative. Even a year later, the sense of shared purpose endured, a fragile bond bridging the old divides. He glanced at the red and gold banners draped to cover scorch marks. Soon, fresh tapestries would replace them, depicting new symbols for a new era. In the distant courtyard, a cluster of small folk wandered past, led by a steward giving them tasks in exchange for shelter. Tyrion wondered if that same steward might one day speak of these times as the dawn of something better, or if they'd see it simply as the uneasy lull between tragedies. The realm had known countless tragedies, and he couldn't erase the fear that more would come. He arrived at the smaller council room, an alternate chamber they sometimes used for private meetings. Davos was already there, seated at a table strewn with maps, his tired eyes studying the lines that represented roads, rivers, and trade routes. He looked up when Tyrion entered and half smiled. "You're late," Davos remarked gently. "Apologies," Tyrion said, taking a seat across from him. "I had an impromptu consultation with Sam and ran into Bronn. Anything urgent?" Davos sighed, rubbing his thumbs over a callus on his palm. "We've had a fresh report of trouble near the Riverlands. A group of outlaws, led by a man calling himself the Bastard of Harrenhal, though no one's sure who sired him, has been raiding merchant wagons. The local lords are calling for your intervention." Tyrion raised a brow. "The Bastard of Harrenhal? How imaginative. I thought that cursed fortress would remain deserted." "Apparently not," Davos said. "He's holed up in one of the half-collapsed towers, and with a handful of men, he's been terrorizing travelers. The smaller lords around the Trident lack the numbers to take him down easily, or so they claim." Tyrion drummed his fingers on the table. "We can't let lawlessness take root. We'll need to dispatch a royal force to quell this band. But let's not be heavy-handed. Send a contingent of gold cloaks, perhaps accompanied by a knight or two from the new cavalry. If we can capture this so-called bastard, we'll put him on trial. I'd rather not see more bloodshed unless it's necessary." Davos nodded, making a note. "Understood. We should also consider if this is part of a wider pattern. There have been rumors of other bandit leaders styling themselves as something grand. People are eager for any banner or name if it means defying authority." Tyrion closed his eyes briefly. "The legacy of war, I suppose. Too many men learned to fight, kill, and take during the chaos. Now they can't adapt to peace. We'll need to root this out carefully or it will spread. Let's make sure the people know the crown will protect their right to travel and trade freely." Davos agreed, and the two spent the next hour discussing details. They charted a plan to dispatch a small force, coordinate with local lords, and ensure that captured outlaws would face a fair trial rather than summary executions. Tyrion hoped such an approach would maintain the realm's fragile trust, demonstrating that justice was not the old, arbitrary style of vengeance but a new system under his rule. After they finished, Tyrion excused himself, feeling his stomach rumble. He'd had only a light breakfast with Sam, and a day of navigating crises demanded more sustenance. He wandered into the keep's kitchens, a labyrinth of roasting fires and simmering pots, bustling with cooks and scullions. At the sight of the king himself, they scrambled to bow or curtsy, but Tyrion motioned for them to relax. The master cook, a woman named Brenna, offered him a plate of roasted fish and stewed vegetables. Tyrion thanked her and carried the plate to a side table, where he ate standing, inhaling the savory aroma of pepper and onions. It felt good to eat without ceremony, just another figure in the swirl of the keep's daily life. He had nearly finished when Ser Podrick appeared, bobbing his head. "Your Grace, Tyrion. Sansa Stark is asking to speak with you in the gardens if you're free." Tyrion nodded, swallowing the last morsel of fish. "I'll see her at once." He wiped his mouth, handed the empty plate to a nearby page, and left the kitchens. The keep's corridors seemed brighter now that midday light was streaming in. He cut through a small courtyard where a fountain trickled gently, then turned down a passage that led to the royal gardens. He found Sansa by a flowering bush that had been planted to replace the scorched remains of older shrubs. The bush bore pale pink blossoms, delicate and fragrant. She turned at his approach, her auburn hair catching the sun. "Tyrion," she said with a small nod, adopting the same informality he had requested from Sam. "Thank you for coming. It's lovely here, isn't it? The gardeners have done wonders." Tyrion joined her, breathing in the fresh scent of flowers and grass. "They have. I never thought I'd see these gardens so full of life again." Sansa's eyes flickered with memories. "I was afraid King's Landing would never recover, at least in my lifetime. Yet here we are, not only rebuilding but thriving." She hesitated, glancing at him. "But I didn't ask you here just to comment on the gardens. I received word that some of the northern houses are growing restless with the current arrangement. They're concerned about how quickly we're forging alliances with other regions, and they question whether the North's independence might be overshadowed. Tyrion considered her words. I had expected some pushback. Which houses specifically? A few of the smaller ones, House Serwyn, House Glover, even some minor lords in the foothills near the Vale border. They worry that if the crown fosters a confederation where we all share trade and defense, the North might once again be pulled into southern conflicts. Is that also your concern? Tyrion asked gently, studying her face. Sansa took a moment before replying. I understand their fears. The North spent centuries under southern kings, and we gained our independence through blood and hardship. Yet I also see the value in unity, especially after what we all faced with the Night King and the final war. The world is smaller than it once was, and threats can come from many directions. Tyrion nodded. It's a delicate balance, allowing each region autonomy while also forming a strong alliance. Perhaps we should formalize clearer language in the treaties, guaranteeing that the North will only send its forces if there's a direct threat to the realm as a whole. If the southern lords decide to bicker among themselves, your houses won't be obligated to join the fight. Sansa's posture relaxed slightly. That might help. Clear terms could ease their worries. Otherwise, old suspicions will gnaw at them. Draft the language you'd find acceptable, Tyrion said. We'll work it into the Confederation agreements. I want every region to feel secure, not coerced. The entire point of this new arrangement is to avoid the iron-fisted rule that led us to so much misery. Sansa inclined her head in gratitude. I'll do that. Thank you for being open to compromise. The North will remember it. Tyrion smiled faintly at the old phrase, the North remembers. So much history lay in those words. I trust you'll remain a while longer in King's Landing? He asked. We could use your perspective. I will, she said, at least for a fortnight, maybe longer. Then I must return home. But I'll leave someone here to represent the North in ongoing discussions, likely a skilled envoy from Winterfell. As for me, well, you know how the North demands a constant presence. He nodded, taking a moment to look beyond her at the shimmering fountain, the new blooms. I'm grateful for your support, Sansa. We may not always agree on every nuance, but you've proven a fair and capable leader. If we manage to pull Westeros into a peaceful era, you'll have been as crucial a part of it as anyone. Her eyes flickered with an emotion he couldn't quite name, perhaps pride tinged with sorrow. Thank you, Tyrion. You've grown into your crown more gracefully than I expected. She paused, then lowered her voice. Just remember, power can be an insidious thing, even when you believe you're wielding it for good. I've seen it corrupt people who started with noble intentions. He let out a soft breath. I know. I do my best to keep that knowledge close. And I have good advisors, yourself included, to remind me if I stray. They parted on that note. Tyrion wandered the garden for a while, letting the perfume of fresh blossoms soothe him. He thought of the vow he'd made to break the cycle of tyranny and violence, to be a different kind of king. Sansa's words echoed in his mind, and he wondered if it was truly possible for power not to poison its bearer in time. But worrying about that would serve no purpose except to make him paralyzed. All he could do was remain vigilant, keep his principles, and rely on the voices of those he trusted. He returned to the main corridors, heading for the throne room where a few afternoon petitions were scheduled. The Iron Throne, though twisted and half-melted, still dominated the dais. It never failed to unnerve him when he walked in, remembering the day Daenerys had approached it, dreaming of a new world, only to burn so many in the pursuit of that dream. Tyrion took his seat with cautious care, ignoring the prickle of metal beneath the cushion. The hall was not as crowded as it had been during certain royal courts in the past, but a modest crowd awaited his presence. Courtiers, minor lords, a handful of merchants. All bowed or curtsied, though Tyrion thought he caught a few uncertain gazes darting his way. The herald announced the first petitioner, a merchant from Volantis who had recently sailed into Blackwater Bay, complaining about the city's docking fees. He stepped forward, wearing elegant silk robes and a frown that suggested he found Westeros barbaric. Your Grace, the merchant said, bowing stiffly, I must protest the exorbitant tariffs your officials have imposed. My ship carried valuable spices and incense, yet I am charged nearly double what I paid a few months ago. This will ruin my trade. Tyrion glanced toward Davos, who stood near the dais with a ledger. Davos spoke up in a calm tone, explaining that the city had instituted a new tiered tariff system to help fund harbor repairs. The old docks were badly damaged, Davos said. We needed coin to rebuild them. The merchant bristled. I understand repairs cost money, but doubling tariffs in such a short span is unconscionable. How do you expect to maintain trade if you discourage foreign merchants? Tyrion laced his fingers together, considering. We do need a balance. The crown must fund essential repairs, yet we cannot drive merchants away. My question, good sir, is whether you were informed of these new tariffs before you set sail. The merchant hesitated. Well, I perhaps not fully informed. Rumors reached me that fees might rise, but not to this extent. Tyrion sighed inwardly. Here is what I propose. The new tariffs remain in place for now, but I will instruct the master of coin and the harbor officials to grant you a partial rebate, considering you left port before official notice was widely circulated. In return, you and your fellow merchants can help us by spreading word throughout Volantis and the free cities that King's Landing is rebuilding but requires investment. If we can attract more trade, perhaps we can lower tariffs for everyone in the future. The merchant eyed him warily, but the possibility of partial relief softened his stance. A fair compromise, your grace, he said at last, bowing. I will spread word among my associates, and I thank you. Tyrion nodded. See Davos after court to finalize the details. He gestured for the next petitioner, trying not to let fatigue seep into his posture. Another hour passed in a litany of minor complaints and requests. A fisherman wanted compensation for a lost net, a pair of local farmers bickered over water rights to a creek. A hedge knight claimed a small piece of land had been promised to him in exchange for service during the war. Tyrion heard each grievance, made judgments, and offered solutions that felt as balanced as he could manage. Some left satisfied, others less so, but none stormed out in rage. By the time court ended, Tyrion's head throbbed. Judging petty disputes was as draining as orchestrating major political maneuvers. Yet he reminded himself that these small matters were the daily lifeblood of rule. If a king ignored them, resentment would fester among the common folk as surely as any rebellion among the lords. Rising from the throne, he stretched his stiff shoulders. Davos approached him, pinching the bridge of his nose. I never thought I'd see you as a patient judge of fishing nets, your grace, Davos said with a wry grin. But you did well. Tyrion let out a tired chuckle. I've mediated more arguments about sheep and goats than I ever imagined possible. But it keeps the realm running. They made their way to a side corridor, then ascended a flight of steps that led to Tyrion's solar. Once inside, the hush of the space soothed him. He gestured for Davos to sit, then poured them both a small measure of wine, just enough to take the edge off. Any pressing matters left for the day? Tyrion asked, sitting opposite Davos. Nothing too urgent, Davos said, sipping his wine. We've handled the main petitions. The dispatch to the Riverlands about that outlaw band is being prepared. The Dornish envoys are due back in a few days for further discussions. And there's a rumor that the Iron Bank wants to send an observer to evaluate our credit. Tyrion suppressed a groan at the mention of the Iron Bank. Of course they do. We owed them quite a sum before the war, and I doubt they've forgotten. But let them send their observer. If we show them the progress we're making, perhaps we can negotiate better terms. Davos sighed. It never ends, does it? Not really. Tyrion studied the swirling pattern in the wine. But it's still preferable to the chaos we live through. I'll endure endless negotiations if it means fewer pyres in the streets. Davos nodded, and a companionable silence stretched between them. Tyrion sometimes reflected on how unlikely it was for him to develop such a rapport with Ser Davos, a man who had once served Stannis Baratheon, then Jon Snow, and now the imp on the Iron Throne. Life had a strange way of weaving threads together. After finishing the wine, Davos left to oversee some final tasks, and Tyrion decided he needed a brief respite. He made his way to a small window seat, leaning against the sill to gaze out at the city. With the sun dipping toward the horizon, rooftops glowed in amber light, and he could see the bustle of evening markets winding down. Candlelit windows flickered here and there, small beacons of domestic life. A swirl of memory took him back to another era when he was just a young man reading books in dark corners, dreaming of lands beyond his father's control. He had never dared dream of ruling the city. But destiny was often cruel and bizarre. As the sky dimmed further, he roused himself and went to check on the final arrangement for the day. He found Podrick outside his solar, who informed him that a messenger from the Vale had arrived, bearing letters from Lord Robin Arryn, now grown into a more capable lord, guided by his trusted advisors. Tyrion took the letters and read them in the corridor's torchlight. The Vale declared they were ready to join the Confederation formally, pending a final treaty to ensure free passage through the Bloody Gate and fair trade taxes. It was yet more good news, another piece in the puzzle of forging a lasting peace. Tyrion penned a quick reply, stating his willingness to finalize details, and handed it back to the messenger along with instructions to rest in the keep before setting out again. Darkness had fully fallen now. Tyrion retired to his quarters, let the attendants help him remove his boots, and changed into a soft linen shirt and trousers that passed for nightclothes. With a small candle flickering on a table, he sank onto his bed, releasing a long breath. Exhaustion tugged at him, but so did the swirl of thoughts about upcoming treaties, potential crises, and the unending demands of rule. He considered pouring another cup of wine to lull himself to sleep, but decided against it. His mind needed clarity, not haze. He pulled back the covers and settled, letting his eyes drift shut. Shadows moved behind his eyelids, silhouettes of dragons long gone, the shape of a certain queen whose memory still pained him. He silently recited the commitments he had made to serve justice and avoid the pitfalls of tyranny, to unite rather than divide. If anyone had told him years ago that he would be upholding such ideals on the Iron Throne, he would have laughed or scoffed. Yet here he was, forging a precarious new era. When sleep finally claimed him, it was gentler than the nightmares he often endured. Dawn came quietly, rousing him with soft gray light. He rose, feeling the familiar heaviness in his limbs, but also the subtle lift of knowing the realm's horizon continued to brighten. Each day he remained king without plunging Westeros into chaos was a triumph. He broke his fast on bread and olives, then dressed and found Podrick at his side, already listing matters that required attention. Tyrion made his way through the keep, stopping to speak with the head steward about provisions, ensuring that last night's deliveries from Storm's End were properly inventoried. Gendry Baratheon had become increasingly adept at managing the shipping lanes, though his own domain in the Stormlands demanded much of him. Nonetheless, trade from the Stormlands had begun to flow more steadily, and intended to say more to protest that he should tend to himself, but she was already drifting. In the haze of half-sleep, she recalled her imprisonment, her flight on Drogon, the heartbreak of men dying to rescue her. The images washed over her until exhaustion claimed her fully. When she awoke, pale afternoon light filtered through the window's cracked shutters. Her limbs felt stiff, but the short rest had restored some measure of clarity. She rose, pressing a hand against her tangled hair. The city beyond remained far from quiet. She could hear distant voices, hammers, the rumble of wagon wheels on stone. The living, breathing pulse of King's Landing. Her footsteps echoed in the chamber as she moved to the window. Through a gap in the shutters, she saw columns of smoke rising from the southern districts, though fewer than before. People moved in clusters along the main streets, some bearing tools or water barrels, others pulling salvage from the rubble. She recognized the faint silhouettes of unsullied patrols interspersed with local folk. For better or worse, she was now the de facto ruler of the largest city in Westeros, and it would not be an easy burden. She heard voices in the corridor and opened the door to find Missandei and Tyrion deep in conversation. Both looked up, startled. Tyrion offered a small bow. "Apologies if we woke you, Your Grace. We were just about to check in." Daenerys gave a slight nod. "How goes it?" Tyrion's weary sigh spoke volumes. "We've set up temporary food distribution near the Great September ruins and more at the Flea Bottom entrance. Some Lannister loyalists are stirring trouble, but it's scattered. Grey Worm's men are keeping order, though we've had a few scuffles." Missandei added, a large portion of the city's gold and weapon stores were seized in the Red Keep's treasury. "There's enough here to distribute to impoverished sections of the population or to rebuild." Daenerys was silent a moment, letting the magnitude of these developments settle. She'd never been in a position to so directly manage the day-to-day needs of hundreds of thousands of people. Previously, she had freed cities like Yunkai and Meereen, but there she'd faced a different structure of power, slavers, ancient families, and a language barrier that Missandei had bridged. This was new, yet in many ways, heartbreakingly familiar. "We should feed the people first," she said. "That always was our priority: food, water, and security. As for the city's gold, we'll need to set aside funds for reconstruction. Let the realm see that I do not hoard wealth like the Lannisters." Tyrion inclined his head, calculating. "It might be wise to invest in repairs to the city walls and the outer defenses. If anyone else attempts to seize King's Landing while we're still consolidating." Daenerys inhaled. "Yes, I understand. But we must also consider the people's living conditions, not just the walls. If we invest only in fortification, they'll see no difference between me and Cersei." Missandei gently touched Daenerys' arm. "There is another matter, Your Grace. Some of the city's notables, minor lords, merchants, guild leaders, are petitioning to meet with you. They say they want to understand how you intend to rule." A wry smile touched Daenerys' lips. "They want to see how they can profit or survive under the new queen, you mean?" She rubbed her temples. "But they're part of the city's fabric. I can't ignore them if I plan to rebuild." "Fine. We'll meet them. Tyrion, can you arrange it? Something small, not too grand. Let them see me, but let us not waste a whole day on ceremony. We have more pressing work." Tyrion agreed, turning to coordinate with Missandei. Daenerys followed, stepping back down the corridor. She needed fresh clothes, a wash, and a moment to compose herself before facing the city's power brokers. Yora lingered in her wake, and she offered him a soft look of concern. "Did you see to your wound?" He inclined his head, patting his bandaged side. "It's been dealt with, my queen. Hurts like the seven hells, but I'll survive." She nodded, relieved, and resumed walking. In one of the keep's side wings, they found a chamber that had been hastily cleaned and prepared for her. A copper tub stood near the hearth, steam curling. Daenerys sank into the water, hissing softly at the heat on her sore muscles. Missandei discreetly remained by the chamber door, both to grant privacy and to field the swirl of messengers that kept arriving. Daenerys tried to let her mind relax, if only for a few moments, as the grime and blood of war dissolved into the water. But her thoughts raced, filled with 1,000 concerns. The fate of Cersei's trial, the city's supply lines, the potential threat from other regions that might contest her rule. An hour later, cleansed and clothed in a simple dark blue dress, her silver hair still damp, Daenerys emerged. She pinned a Targaryen brooch at her shoulder, not so garish as a crown, but a clear symbol of her house. Missandei offered a faint, encouraging smile as they made their way to a small audience room. Tyrion was already there, standing beside a battered table, scanning a list of names. Several chairs had been arranged facing the table. Unsullied stood at the walls, spears held upright. The tall windows admitted light that glinted off the broken mosaic floor. Tyrion set the parchment aside. The notables should arrive soon, merchants, guild masters, a handful of lesser lords who remained loyal to the Lannisters out of fear rather than conviction. They want to see how we intend to run things. I suggest we keep the conversation short, answer questions calmly. Let them see we're not about to burn them alive, and that might help quell panic. Daenerys gave a sharp nod, settling onto the chair at the head of the table. The wood creaked softly under her weight. "We can do that. And perhaps glean something of how the city functioned under Cersei, the infrastructure, the debts, the trade routes." Her eyes flicked around the chamber. "Are we certain they're not armed?" Grey Worm, who had arrived to stand guard as well, inclined his head. "We searched them at the gate and posted guards. Still, remain cautious." Soon enough, a small knot of figures was shown in. They were varying expressions of tension, fear, and curiosity. Daenerys recognized none of them by face, but some wore the distinct garb of wealthy merchants or lesser lords, embroidered vests, polished boots. A man with thinning hair stepped forward, a ring of keys at his belt clattering. He bowed awkwardly. "Your Grace, I am Tomard Plum, Guildmaster for the city's dockworkers. My colleagues and I, we appreciate you granting us this audience." Daenerys inclined her head, her voice measured. "Speak freely." He swallowed hard. "We have families, workers, dockhands, shipwrights. We need to know. Will trade continue? Will the city's ports remain open? We rely on the shipping lines for our livelihoods. If your new regime disrupts that, many will starve." Daenerys remembered the thousands of dockworkers she had witnessed in Meereen. She understood well how entire economies could crumble under uncertain rule. "The ports will remain open," she said. "I have no intention of stifling trade or letting your people starve. We'll do everything possible to restore normal commerce. But the city has faced chaos. We must first ensure safety." One of the lesser lords stepped forward, a balding man in a dusty velvet tunic. "Your Grace, the crown owes substantial debts to various houses and foreign bankers. Cersei suspended some payments, increased others. We fear more disruptions, and we fear that these unsavory creditors will come seeking repayment by force." Daenerys had heard mention of the Iron Bank in Braavos and other financial institutions that had once backed the Lannisters. "We will address debts responsibly," she said, her tone quieter now. "But I will not let foreign bankers hold the people hostage. If the crown owes money, negotiations will occur in good faith. No more punishing the common folk to service a royal debt. I cannot promise immediate solutions, but I promise fairness." Another merchant, A stout woman with lines of worry etched on her face cleared her throat. "What of your dragon?" She flinched as she spoke, glancing at the Unsullied as though expecting reprisal. We've heard the stories of Dragonfire. Will the city live under the threat of that? If there's unrest, or if some disagree, will you unleash him again?" Daenerys felt the weight of every rumor swirling about her. She thought of Drogon, who even now soared above the city or perched on a nearby hill. "My dragon is not a tool of oppression," she answered firmly. "He is my companion in war, yes, but I do not intend to terrorize civilians into obedience. He will not harm you as long as you do not seek to harm the innocent or rise in rebellion to slaughter my people. Let us be clear, I will defend those who cannot defend themselves. But I have no desire to burn the city I'm trying to save." A subdued hush settled, broken only by the shuffling of feet. A few dared to nod, seemingly reassured that they had not come before another mad Targaryen eager to incinerate them all. One by one, they voiced smaller concerns: the bridging of a collapsed thoroughfare, the distribution of fresh water, the status of city watchmen who were once sworn to Cersei. Daenerys fielded these as best she could, frequently turning to Tyrion for details. He answered adeptly, drawing on his knowledge of King's Landing's complexities. Missandei took notes, her quill scratching on parchment. Grey Worm stood silent, watchful. When at last the notables had spoken their fill, Daenerys concluded with a promise: "We will continue these talks as the city stabilizes. Bring your concerns to the keep. I will hold open audiences as often as possible." Her voice softened. "I know you are frightened. I know you wonder if my rule will be any different. Judge me by my actions." She rose, signaling the end of the audience. The delegates bowed again, some more deeply than others, and withdrew. Once the door closed, Daenerys let out a quiet sigh. "They're terrified," she said. "But they aren't vengeful." Tyrion nodded, setting aside the parchment. "That's a start. Many of them were prepared for the worst. If they leave here believing you might be reasonable, that rumor will spread. The city might come faster." Daenerys pressed her lips together in a thin line. "And if it doesn't? If rival claimants appear with an army, or if certain lords band together to overthrow me?" Tyrion looked into her eyes. "Then we fight for the realm we want. But we'll do our damnedest to show Westeros that this is not another tyranny." He hesitated. "There is another matter. News is spreading of your capture and miraculous escape, of your subsequent victory. Word travels fast. Some are calling you the Dragon Queen who cannot be contained. Others call you the greatest threat to the old houses since Aegon's conquest. We don't know yet how the major lords in the Reach, the Stormlands, or the North will respond." Daenerys' heart stirred at the mention of the North. She remembered Jon Snow, how they had once allied against the threat of the dead. That threat had ended at a cost Daenerys still felt in her soul. She wondered where he was now and if he still lived at Winterfell or had gone beyond the wall. "We must send ravens," she said. "Reach out to every great house that remains. Let them know I hold King's Landing and that I call upon them to avoid further bloodshed. I would rather be a unifier than continue these endless wars. If they refuse, we will deal with it. But first, let them see we are willing to talk." Tyrion's brow furrowed at the complexity of that task. "We'll draft letters. I can help shape the language. There's a chance some will prefer negotiation to open conflict, especially if they believe your dragon is unstoppable. But there will be holdouts, those who will never bend the knee to a Targaryen." Daenerys closed her eyes briefly, recalling the scorched fields where she had once demanded fealty of defeated soldiers. She had tried to temper that cruelty, but not always successfully. "We'll address them if and when it comes to it." Then she shook off her brooding. "What of the city's immediate repairs? The fires?" Tyrion and Missandei exchanged a glance. Missandei took a step forward. "Most fires are under control thanks to the citizens who rallied with the Unsullied to douse them. The southern wards suffered the worst damage. Some buildings collapsed near the Dragon Pit. But it's not total devastation. It could have been far worse if the siege had gone on longer. For the moment, we can focus on clearing debris and stabilizing structures to prevent more collapses." Daenerys nodded. "Then let's devote gold and labor to that immediately. Workers will be compensated. They need to see tangible proof that we're rebuilding, not just ruling from above." Tension flickered through her shoulders. She could hear in her mind the unspoken question: where does she find the gold to pay for this? But the Red Keep's vaults held considerable spoils, and the caravan she had captured earlier was loaded with gold meant for the crown. Perhaps it was enough to begin. She would not become a hoarder of wealth while the city starved. She made a decision: I will tour the damaged wards myself, see the destruction with my own eyes. Gather some guards. Let people see that I stand among them, not apart from them." Tyrion pursed his lips, clearly uneasy. "That's dangerous. Cersei might have left pockets of archers or saboteurs. The city is big and not everyone is ready to bow to you. We can send loyal men." "I must do it," Daenerys insisted. "They need to see me. I ruled Meereen by walking its streets, facing its people. I won't cower behind the Red Keep's walls." Tyrion made a reluctant gesture of assent. "Then we do it carefully. Grey Worm can select your escort. I'll accompany you as well." "Good," she said. "We'll go now before nightfall." She stood from her seat and moved toward the door, her mind turning over the possibilities of ambush. But her instincts told her that if she hid away in the keep, fear would fester among the people and the seeds of distrust would only grow. Better to walk among them to show that she did not fear them or regard them as enemy hostages. Within half an hour, Daenerys was ready. She wore a simpler cloak over her dress, hood pulled back so her silver hair was visible, no crown, no elaborate finery. Grey Worm selected a squad of Unsullied, each armed with spear and shield. Jorah joined them, wearing his sword with a careful stoicism. Tyrion walked at her side, already scanning the streets with anxious vigilance. Outside the keep, they found a city in the midst of a delicate transformation. The battered gates stood open, half the portcullis smashed. Rubble lined the roads where sections of stone had collapsed. Smoke curled from broken rooftops. People moved with guarded urgency, trying to salvage belongings or herd frightened children away from precarious structures. The smell of soot and sweat clung to the air. Daenerys' heart clenched at the sight. War was never clean, and victory often left behind a landscape of sorrow. A hush spread when the small folk spotted Daenerys. Some paused in their work while others drew back. An uneasy question traveled through the crowd: would she lash out at them, punish them, or simply pass by? Daenerys, accompanied by her entourage, stepped carefully around fallen beams and tangled heaps of masonry. A young mother clutched a toddler close, her face streaked with grime and tears. Daenerys felt a pang and paused, meeting the woman's eyes. She offered a gentle nod. "Are you hurt?" she asked quietly. The woman shook her head, lips parted in silent fear. Daenerys noticed the child's foot was bleeding, a small cut, but enough to matter in these circumstances. She knelt, ignoring the protest of her stiff muscles, and beckoned for one of her guards to fetch a bandage from a small satchel. The mother stared in disbelief as the Dragon Queen tended to the wound herself, carefully binding the foot. "There," Daenerys said softly, forcing a small smile for the child who hid shyly behind his mother's arm. "Be safe." The mother managed a trembling thanks. Daenerys squeezed her hand gently, then rose and continued onward. That small act of kindness did not suddenly transform the city's anxiety, but Daenerys sensed a slight easing of tension among the onlookers. They saw her not as a distant conqueror but as a woman capable of compassion. As she proceeded through the district, she asked the people about the state of their homes, their food supplies, the water lines. She heard tales of collapsed wells, of broken cisterns. She listened, instructing Tyrion to note each issue. When they reached a half-ruined building near the city's southern edge, she found a group of men trying to dislodge a large wooden beam pinning an older woman's leg. Without hesitation, Daenerys joined them, pushing at the debris. Grey Worm and Jorah stepped up, using their strength to shift the beam enough for the men to pull the injured woman free. She groaned in pain, tears streaking her dirt-caked cheeks, but she was alive. Again, Daenerys ordered a guard to fetch a makeshift stretcher to carry the woman to a place where she could receive rudimentary care. At intervals, she glimpsed the flicker of gratitude on people's faces. Some whispered blessings while others stared in stunned silence. Tyrion observed all this with a faint, thoughtful expression. "You know," he said quietly, "moments like these are more powerful than any speech. You show them who you are." Daenerys nodded, her eyes drifting across the rubble-strewn road. "It's what I must do. If I only speak of mercy and never show it, what good are words? We have to rebuild trust piece by piece." She turned, noticing a figure among the crowd, a Lannister soldier, unarmed, watching her with haunted eyes. He stood near a charred cart, his tabard torn and blood-stained. She approached him carefully. The soldier stiffened, but he did not flee. Daenerys could see a bandage on his forearm, presumably from an earlier skirmish. She inclined her head in a gesture of acknowledgement. "Are you well?" she asked. He blinked, evidently not expecting such a question from the woman who had overthrown his queen. Slowly, he shook his head, voice trembling. I fought for House Lannister. My commander told us you would burn us all. But you haven't." Daenerys exhaled. "I fought your commander because he wouldn't lay down arms. But that doesn't mean I wish harm on those who surrender." He lowered his gaze, perhaps ashamed or simply overwhelmed. "I have a family in the city's western wards. I was pressed into service months ago. I never wanted. His voice trailed off. Daenerys spoke quietly, mindful of how many in the crowd were listening. Return to them, then. You are free to go. But know that if you raise arms against me again, I will defend my people. Do you understand? His eyes widened, tears threatening. He nodded vigorously, then murmured something like gratitude, stumbling away with disbelief etched on his face. Daenerys watched him go, conscious that Tyrion and others were observing her every move. She had made her choice. She could not let resentment fester by punishing every Lannister soldier who had ever lifted a sword. If she truly meant to unify the realm, she had to break that cycle. She wondered, deep down, if it would make her appear weak to some. But then she recalled the city's bells and the hush that had followed. Fear alone might bring submission, but never loyalty. They continued their tour. For hours, Daenerys walked the streets, speaking with the wounded, comforting the grieving, offering instructions on how to coordinate repairs. Grey Worm dispatched squads of Unsullied to clear the roads, help with collapsed buildings, and guard the supply wagons that began to roll in from the keep. Night crept in before they turned back toward the Red Keep, exhausted yet filled with a tentative sense of hope. Tyrion's boots dragged on the cobblestones and Missandei's brow glistened with sweat, but both carried themselves with a measure of pride. I think you made a difference today, Missandei murmured. People expected a dragon queen to burn them. Instead, they saw you help them. Daenerys' heart felt heavy and light all at once. It's one day, she said softly. We'll need many days like this before they truly believe me. But a small, genuine smile touched her lips. Still, it felt right. That night, back in the keep's lesser audience chamber, Daenerys convened with her closest counselors Tyrion, Missandei, Grey Worm, Yora, and a handful of trusted captains who had fought loyally at her side. A pair of torches lit the dusty corners and the group crowded around a table on which Tyrion had spread a map of Westeros. The lines of trade routes and major roads were marked as well as the known seats of power. Daenerys stood at the head of the table, arms folded. All right, she began. We control King's Landing, the heart of the Crownlands. But the rest of the realm is uncertain. We need to solidify alliances or at least neutrality. We can't fight every region. Let's start with the north. What do we know? A young captain cleared his throat. Reports say the north is quiet, more concerned with rebuilding after the war against the dead. No large armies are on the move. Their warden, if they've named a new one, hasn't officially declared for or against you. Some say Sansa Stark remains in Winterfell, others claim she's turned her attention to local governance. As for Jon Snow, rumors say he left the north entirely, traveling beyond the wall or into exile. Daenerys felt a pang of nostalgia and regret at the mention of Jon's name, but she forced her voice to remain steady. Send a raven to Lady Stark requesting a formal meeting or at least an exchange of envoys. Offer friendship. She and I never fully trusted one another, but we both fought for the living ones. We can find common ground again. She paused. Emphasized that I have no intention of demanding the North bend the knee unwillingly. I wish peace, not subjugation. Tyrion quirked an eyebrow but did not protest. Missandei jotted down notes. Daenerys continued, her gaze sweeping the map. The Vale of Arryn is closely tied to the north. If Lady Sansa has influence, perhaps the Vale will follow suit and remain neutral or friendly. Her finger slid southward. The Riverlands have been ravaged by war for years. We have an opportunity to offer them stability if we can secure their trust. Who holds Riverrun now? One of Tyrion's sources spoke up. Edmure Tully reclaimed it after the phrase were dealt with. He hasn't taken a strong stance since Cersei's forces retreated. Likely he wants peace for his people. He could be open to an alliance if approached diplomatically. Then do so, Daenerys said. Draft a letter that I will sign personally inviting him to send representatives to King's Landing. He once faced captivity under the Lannisters. Perhaps he'll be relieved to see them dethroned. She continued around the map. The Stormlands are in disarray since the Baratheon line was nearly extinguished. Gendry Baratheon was legitimized by some rumors, but it's uncertain whether that was official or just talk. Regardless, there may be pockets of loyalties or ambitions there. We need to tread carefully. I do not wish to fight the Stormlords, but they might resent Targaryen rule. She recalled how Robert Baratheon had once usurped the throne from her father, setting into motion the Targaryens' exile. Old grudges could linger. Next, she considered the Reach, recalling that it had fallen under Lannister sway after House Tyrell was destroyed. Cersei gave Highgarden to the Tarleys, but that line is broken as well. We've heard rumors of various claimants. The people in the Reach must be weary of war. If we can show them that I can preserve the fertility of their fields and the wealth of their trade, they may prefer me to chaos. Tyrion let out a slow breath. House Tyrell was beloved in its way for the prosperity it brought. You might face resentment for their downfall as it occurred under your watch when you first arrived. Some might blame you for not saving them from Cersei's onslaught. But also many in the Reach blame the Lannisters for the Tyrells' destruction. There's an opening there if we handle it delicately. We will, Daenerys agreed. Draft letters, propose alliances, or at least mutual benefit. Stress that we want to restore trade routes and ensure peace. We don't have the luxury of imposing ourselves upon every region by force. She ran a hand through her hair, glancing at Grey Worm who stood near the door. We have the Unsullied, but we can't occupy the entirety of Westeros. Nor do I wish to. The meeting continued for some time, analyzing each region's potential stance. Dorne had long despised the Lannisters, and though their ruling family was fractured, Daenerys guessed they might be more amenable than most. The Iron Islands were another question: broken leadership, unclear alliances, and a historical inclination toward raiding. Nothing was simple, and she felt the mounting weight of these realities. But at least they had a plan: to reach out, to rebuild, to avoid fresh wars if possible. When the meeting concluded, Daenerys dismissed everyone except for Tyrion. She needed a private word. He lingered by the table, unrolling a fresh scroll, clearly thinking about his next letter. When the door shut, she spoke softly. You've served me well, Tyrion. And you have a personal stake in all of this, your family, your name. I know how hard it must be to stand with me when so many see me as your family's worst enemy. He pursed his lips, setting down the quill. Perhaps once it was unthinkable. But I've seen enough bloodshed in my time to know that continuing the old feuds doesn't serve anyone. My sister, she made her choices. If there was a chance to save her, it ended long ago. I still feel sorrow for what became of my family, but the realm matters more. Daenerys nodded. And what of your brother, Jaime? Tyrion's voice caught for a moment. He died trying to save the city from further violence, if I believe the last rumors. Or perhaps he just wanted to be with Cersei in the end. I don't know. I only know that he was honorable in some ways, monstrous in others, like all of us. He released a slow breath. The war demanded we take sides. Now we must do better. That's what I choose. Daenerys studied him, hearing sincerity under the layers of regret. Very well. Then we do better together. She paused, changing the subject. When shall we hold Cersei's trial? Tyrion's brow furrowed. Soon, I imagine. But not so soon that we can't handle more pressing needs first. The city is in chaos, and calling a formal trial might set off new unrest. Some who remain loyal to her could see it as an opportunity to riot, to try and free her, to sabotage you. Others might demand immediate execution. We need to stage it carefully lest it turn into a spectacle that tears the city apart again. Daenerys pursed her lips, recalling her own trial in the Dragon Pit, the memory still raw. We will give her a chance to speak in her own defense, as she never granted me. But I suspect she will use that platform to poison the crowd against me. She raised her chin. No matter. I do not fear her words. Only the darkness she might still sow. Let's postpone it a few weeks, until the city is more stable. Tyrion agreed. Yes, that's best. I'll see to the arrangements, gather any witnesses or records of her misdeeds, ensure the trial is orderly. She'll have a chance to respond to the charges. If she declines to speak, that's her choice. Very well, Daenerys said. We'll announce it in due time. She felt a tremor of unease. Even though Cersei had wronged her in countless ways, Daenerys did not relish the idea of parading her as a prisoner again. Yet she knew it must be done to show the realm that justice, not vengeance, prevailed. Thank you, she said, meeting Tyrion's eyes. Get some rest if you can. Tomorrow will be just as busy. Tyrion offered a tired grin. Rest would be lovely, indeed. He excused himself, leaving Daenerys alone in the torchlit chamber. She stared at the map. Candlelight dancing across the drawn outlines of kingdoms she must somehow hold together. Her mind buzzed with the enormity of the task. She could almost feel the presence of her ancestors whispering through the centuries. Aegon the Conqueror, who took this land by fire and blood, and all those who came after, some mad, some wise, all overshadowed by the specter of dragons. Would her reign be a new chapter of horror, or a break from the cycle? When she at last retreated to her chambers, the hour was late. She stood at the window, gazing at the flickers of torchlight in the city below. In the sky, a dark-shaped sword Drogon, prowling the night. She felt the echo of his presence in her blood. Against all odds, they had won the city. She remembered every moment of her capture. The rough hands, the chains, the humiliating march through the gates. Never again, she vowed silently. She would never allow herself or the people she cared about to be subject to such cruelty. She slept, and in her dreams, she walked through a field of ash, haunted by echoes of roars and screams. She sensed shadowy forms. Dragons, yes, but also the ghosts of those she had lost. Ser Barristan, who once guided her. Missandei, who had nearly been taken from her. Ser Yora, always on the brink of death for her sake. The illusions twisted until she awoke in a cold sweat, the first hints of dawn peeking through the shutters. She rose, feeling that there would be no comfort in returning to sleep. The realm waited, demanding a queen who would not bend. In the days that followed, Daenerys maintained her regimen of walking the city, overseeing the distribution of food, instructing the Unsullied to help with rebuilding. The battered gates were repaired enough to control traffic in and out. A new city watch began to form, with men and women chosen from the local population, though the Unsullied still held final authority in these early stages. Tyrion worked tirelessly with merchants and guilds, establishing a semblance of normal commerce. Gold from the Red Keep's vaults was carefully allocated. Daenerys insisted on transparency. If they needed to spend sums on rebuilding, she wanted the people to see it happen, no more secret coffers and hidden bribes. She publicly posted notices of how much the crown allocated for repair of roads, wells, or city structures. As word spread of her policies and her presence in the streets, more people began approaching her directly, sometimes falling at her feet with petitions, sometimes shouting praises or complaints. She listened. She strove to answer or refer them to advisors who could help. She knew she could not manage every detail alone, but the mere act of hearing them fostered a fragile trust. A handful of northern merchants, passing through King's Landing to trade in the south, carried stories of Daenerys' mercy back to the north. Dawn by dawn, she labored to prove she was neither the Mad King reborn nor a tyrant who would torch the city on a whim. Amidst these endeavors, she never forgot her dragons. Drogon often roost on a hillside outside the city, feeding on the occasional sheep or goat from farmland beyond the walls. Farmers initially trembled at the sight, but Daenerys ordered compensation for any lost livestock. She also sent scouts in search of Rhaegal and Viserion. Rumors placed them near Dragonstone or flying over the Narrow Sea. She yearned to be reunited with them to ensure they were safe, but the scouts found little conclusive evidence. For now, she had Drogon by her side, and that would have to suffice. Occasionally, during the quieter hours of dawn or dusk, she would mount Drogon and fly over the city, ensuring no pockets of the old Lannister guard gathered to incite revolt. The city was in no shape to resist a dragon, but she used the flights primarily as a show of vigilance rather than intimidation, making sure to limit any displays of fire. She wanted them to see the black wings overhead and feel watchful eyes, not imminent doom. Each day, the city grew calmer. The black banners with the three-headed dragon insignia began appearing on some corners, hung by small folk who had decided to welcome the new queen. Others, still uncertain, waited and watched. But the fear of immediate retribution began to recede. Daenerys also checked on Cersei from time to time, or at least received reports from the jailers. The former queen languished in a comfortable cell, not the true black cells of the dungeon but a guarded suite above ground, one small concession to ensure that no illusions of torture or cruelty arose. She was fed and clothed, though she remained under constant watch. According to the jailers, Cersei rarely spoke, spending hours staring at the walls or pacing like a caged lioness. Daenerys wondered if the woman who had once tormented her might be unraveling in captivity. Regardless, the trial loomed in the near future. Let her stew, Daenerys thought, while the city she once ruled learns a different path. 2 weeks after taking the city, Daenerys received a raven from Winterfell. The message was penned in Sansa Stark's elegant script. Tyrion read it aloud in a small council meeting. Sansa's words were cautious. She acknowledged the end of Cersei's reign and expressed relief that King's Landing had not been razed. She stated that the North had no desire to rekindle war, provided Daenerys respected its autonomy and the sacrifices its people had made. She did not offer overt fealty nor an invitation for Daenerys to claim the North as her domain, but she suggested a willingness to talk, possibly through envoys. It was neither a declaration of submission nor a threat. A carefully balanced letter reflective of Sansa's astute mind. Daenerys considered it in silence, tapping her finger on the table. She doesn't trust me, she said at last. But at least she isn't rallying armies against me. That's enough for now. She instructed Tyrion to draft a reply affirming that she recognized the North's hardships and inviting mutual respect. She would not, however, concede northern independence just yet. That question could be negotiated if it came to it. From Riverrun, Edmure Tully's response was cautiously favorable. He congratulated Daenerys on unseating the Lannisters who had tormented the Tullys and the Riverlands and expressed a desire to see the crown stabilized under fair rule. He offered to send an emissary to treat with her. Daenerys welcomed the gesture. One piece of the puzzle in place. The weeks turned into a month of unrelenting work, reconstruction, forging alliances, and preparing for the trial that all of King's Landing seemed to await with equal parts dread and fascination. Cersei's name still inspired fear in some quarters. Street rumors claimed she practiced dark arts or that she kept hidden wildfire caches. Daenerys's guard scoured the city, discovering a few small caches of wildfire left from the Mad King's era, but not enough to threaten the entire population. It served as a grim reminder of the city's violent legacy, which Daenerys was determined to break. When the day of Cersei's trial finally arrived, the city was in far better shape than when Daenerys had first taken it. Rubble had been cleared from most main roads and large sections of the outer walls were repaired. Some neighborhoods had begun a slow return to daily routines, markets reopening, blacksmiths forging, children playing. Yet tension still simmered because the trial of a former queen was no small event. People whispered that they would see Cersei Lannister brought out in chains, made to answer for every cruelty. Others worried that it would spark a new round of bloodshed if she used the moment to incite the remaining loyalists. Tyrion had arranged the venue carefully, deciding on the Great Hall in the Red Keep rather than the Dragon Pit. The Dragon Pit's open-air space offered too many chances for chaos. The Great Hall was large enough to accommodate an audience of lords, officials, and representatives of the common folk, but easier to secure with unsullied guards at every entrance. Daenerys had also invited a few foreign observers, merchants from Essos, envoys from Dorne, and even a clerk from the Iron Bank. She wanted them to see that justice under her rule would be neither arbitrary nor cruel. On the morning of the trial, Daenerys dressed in a modest black gown trimmed with red, the three-headed dragon emblem at her shoulder. She wore no crown, though many had urged her to adopt one for the sake of ceremony. She wanted the symbol of House Targaryen visible but not overshadowing the solemnity of the proceedings. Tyrion stood at her side wearing a sober expression while Missandei organized seating for the onlookers. Grey Worm commanded the security detail. A hush fell over the hall as Daenerys entered, her boots clicking on the polished floor. The Iron Throne loomed on its raised dais. Daenerys chose not to sit upon it. Instead, she stood at the head of a long table placed before the dais, with space for the accused and any witnesses to face her. She felt the eyes of hundreds fixed upon her. Lords in the front rows, common folk behind, and a ring of unsullied keeping the aisle clear. Tension hung in the air, thick as storm clouds. Cersei was brought in, hands shackled. She wore a plain gown of gray wool, her once lustrous hair now grown out unevenly. Yet she carried herself with defiance, chin raised, eyes as cold as the depths of winter. The hall murmured as she passed. She was flanked by two unsullied, who guided her to a position across from Daenerys at the table. She stood, unbowed, staring directly at the Dragon Queen. Daenerys drew a breath, letting silence reign for a moment. Then she raised her voice, projecting it across the assembled crowd. Cersei Lannister stands accused of war crimes against the realm, conspiracy to murder, and the brutal misuse of royal power. She is also charged with my unlawful imprisonment and attempted execution without just cause. We gather here to deliver justice, not vengeance. She paused, eyes sweeping the hall. By my command, Cersei Lannister will be given a chance to speak, to answer these charges. We will present evidence of her deeds. Then a verdict will be reached. Cersei's lip curled. This farce is what you call justice? A queen who seized power in a bloody siege claims moral high ground. How poetic. A ripple passed through the onlookers. Daenerys kept her tone measured. I took this city from you after you seized it through manipulation and murder. But let us not debate that now. Present your defense if you have one. She gestured to Tyrion, who stepped forward to list the charges in detail. He began by recounting the betrayal of the Tyrells, the destruction of the Great September, the kidnapping of Valeria Sand, the repeated acts of cruelty against the population, and the imprisonment of Daenerys. He did so without gloating or malice in his voice, simply stating the facts. Cersei stood with arms folded, occasionally letting out a disdainful snort. When Tyrion finished, Daenerys turned to Cersei. "You may respond. The floor is yours." Cersei's gaze raked across the crowd, lingering briefly on a cluster of lords. "And who in this hall is innocent of war?" she spat. "The Targaryens are known for burning entire villages. The Tyrells grew rich by starving out lesser houses. The Starks, the Baratheons, none of them hold clean hands. I did what I had to do to protect my family and my crown. The realm is a game, and I played to win. That is my defense." A bitter hush followed. Daenerys pressed her lips together. "You will not deny the acts you committed?" Cersei's eyes blazed. "I deny nothing. Do what you must. But do not pretend you're better. You burned men alive. You forced them to bend the knee or die. You marched into the city with your dragon. And you have the gall to accuse me of tyranny?" Daenerys felt a flicker of old guilt over the Tarleys. She steadied herself. "I have made mistakes, yes. But I have sought to correct them to end needless suffering. You only doubled down on cruelty whenever challenged. The difference is that I learned and you refused." Cersei barked a laugh. "Learned what? To parade around the city, feeding the poor for a few days and then calling yourself the breaker of chains? If you truly had power, you would not bother with this performance of justice. You'd have killed me by now. But you need this charade, don't you? To convince yourself you're a righteous queen." A stir of unease spread through the hall. Daenerys inhaled, reminding herself that, yes, part of her did yearn for retribution. But she had chosen justice for a reason. "I stand by my decision," she said. "Which is more than you ever did." She nodded to Tyrion, who called forward witnesses, men and women who had suffered under Cersei's regime, freed from the dungeons or from forced labor. They spoke of their experiences, some with trembling voices, some with quiet rage. The crowd listened, riveted, as they recounted how the crown's men had seized their homes, conscripted their sons, threatened them for failing to pay heightened taxes. Cersei stood in stony silence. Finally, Daenerys asked if anyone would speak in defense of Cersei beyond her own words. A hush followed, the silence of a ruler abandoned by nearly all. Not a single soul stepped forward. Even those who had once been fiercely loyal apparently no longer wished to risk themselves for a queen who had lost all advantage. Cersei's eyes flickered, revealing a momentary flash of bitterness. Daenerys raised her voice for the final address. "We have heard the charges. We have heard the witnesses." Cersei Lannister does not deny her actions, she merely declares them necessary to maintain her hold on power. The realm has suffered, not just from her, but from the cycle of bloodshed that has plagued us for generations. Today, we take a step toward ending that cycle. The verdict is clear. She paused, turning her gaze directly on Cersei. "Cersei Lannister, for your crimes against the realm, crimes you freely admit, I declare you guilty. Your sentence is death." A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Daenerys felt the finality of those words like a hammer blow. Even though she knew it was coming, her heart pounded. Cersei had tormented her, nearly killed her, and caused endless suffering. Yet the act of pronouncing a death sentence felt like plunging a knife into the heart of her own resolve for mercy. She drew a shaking breath. "But," she continued, her voice softer, "you shall be granted a swift execution carried out at sunrise tomorrow. The realm will witness that even a queen is not above justice." Cersei's face twisted. For a moment, she seemed on the verge of a hysterical laugh or a venomous retort. Instead, she spat at the floor. "So be it. Another Targaryen pretender sits on a throne made of lies. Kill me if you must. My son, my father, my people, they're all gone. I have nothing left." She sneered one last time. "Your mercy is a lie. This is just a cleaner version of the madness in your veins." Daenerys' stomach churned with mingled anger and sorrow, but she forced herself to remain upright. "Take her away," she said, voice heavy. The unsullied guards led Cersei out, chains rattling. The hall erupted into whispers and subdued exclamations. Tyrion guided Daenerys aside, away from the dais, as the crowd slowly dispersed under the watchful eyes of the Unsullied. Some onlookers seemed relieved or satisfied an era of cruelty was about to end. Others wore thoughtful expressions, perhaps wondering if Daenerys' justice would one day turn upon them. Through it all, Daenerys kept her head high, though her heart weighed like a stone. At length, she retreated to a side chamber where Tyrion, Missandei, Yora, and Grey Worm joined her. The door shut, sealing them in relative privacy. Tyrion let out a trembling breath. "That was heavy." Missandei's eyes glistened with emotion. "You did what was necessary. No one can say you didn't give her the chance to speak." Yora rested a hand on Daenerys' shoulder. "Are you all right, my queen?" She closed her eyes, her voice subdued. I am not sure. Part of me is relieved she can no longer threaten us. Another part of me remembers every cruel moment she inflicted, and I fear the satisfaction of ending her might tarnish my resolve never to become like my father. She opened her eyes. But I had no choice. Grey Worm nodded, resolute. She would never change. She deserved no mercy. Daenerys took a moment, letting silence settle. At sunrise, then. We must handle it without spectacle. A short, dignified execution. Let the realm see the difference between her savage displays of cruelty and our form of justice. Tyrion bowed his head. I'll handle the details. One stroke of the sword, swift and final. Daenerys made no move to argue. She glanced at Missandei. Summon a few key witnesses and inform the city that justice will be served at dawn. But keep it contained, no cheering crowds, no carnival. This is a solemn end to a bloody chapter. The night passed slowly. Daenerys found little rest, drifting in and out of uneasy dreams. She rose before dawn, washing her face and dressing in a simple black coat against the chill. When she stepped into the courtyard, the sky was a deep gray, the first hint of sunrise just a pale glimmer on the horizon. A small assembly awaited. Tyrion, Grey Worm, Yora, Missandei, a handful of lords, and some of the city's folk who had been personally wronged by Cersei. An executioner stood by with a sharp sword. Daenerys had considered the possibility of using Drogon, but that felt too much like the terror Cersei had claimed to fear. She wanted no screams of fire echoing through the city, no spectacle of flame. Cersei was brought forth, shackled once more, her eyes rimmed red from a sleepless night. Yet she still held herself with a fierce pride, refusing to beg or weep. The hush in the courtyard was absolute except for the distant calls of crows. Daenerys stepped forward, meeting Cersei's gaze. This was the woman who had once paraded Daenerys in chains, who had laughed at her humiliation. But Daenerys felt no joy in this moment, only a grim sense of necessity. Cersei Lannister, Daenerys said, her voice carrying in the silent air. You have been found guilty of crimes against the realm. The sentence is death, to be carried out now. Cersei's lips parted, and for an instant Daenerys thought she saw a flicker of fear. But Cersei merely lifted her chin. Do it then, she said, voice hoarse. I've lost everything anyway. Daenerys inclined her head toward the executioner, who raised the sword. A hush fell so profound that Daenerys could hear her own heartbeat. Then, in one clean stroke, the blade descended, severing Cersei's life from her body. A collective exhalation trembled through those gathered. Tyrion looked away, tears dampening the corners of his eyes. Daenerys remained still, her face set in solemn lines. The red of the dawn sky matched the crimson pooling on the cobblestones. And just like that, the Lannister queen's reign ended. There was no cheer, no applause. Daenerys had made sure of that. Men and women began dispersing, some with relief etched across their faces, others with haunted uncertainty. Tyrion stood silently as though carved from stone. Daenerys moved to his side, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, but he did not look at her. She sensed his grief. Cersei, for all her crimes, was still his sister. Missandei, tears in her eyes, kept her distance respectfully. Yora placed a comforting hand on Tyrion's other shoulder. Grey Worm signaled the Unsullied to remove the body, handling it with a stoic efficiency. Daenerys turned to the city beyond the gates, the faint glow of sunrise now gilding the rooftops. With Cersei's death, the last vestiges of the old Lannister regime were swept away. The future rested on Daenerys' shoulders, fragile as spun glass. She inhaled the cool morning air, letting the finality sink in. She would have to be better, kinder, yet still strong enough to hold a realm torn by war. Her eyes drifted upward, seeking the open sky. Above, she glimpsed the faint shape of Drogon circling, watchful, a silent guardian. She whispered under her breath, "It begins anew." She did not elaborate, but the words felt like a promise, to herself, to those who had perished in these wars, and to every soul in Westeros yearning for a day without fear. Perhaps in this new dawn, they could all find a reason to hope. She turned, stepping away from the scene, her entourage falling in behind. The city waited, its wounds not yet healed, its people not yet secure in their faith in her. But she would walk among them, speak to them, rebuild with them. She would never forget the weight of chains on her wrists, nor the smoldering ruin of conquered streets. And she would vow, silently and fiercely, that she would never again become the kind of queen who believed in cruelty as the only path to power. She was Daenerys Targaryen, the breaker of chains, the mother of dragons, and now undeniably the ruler in King's Landing. And in that uncertain dawn, she resolved to forge a realm where no one would ever be bound in chains as she once had been, where even a queen could kneel to compassion and justice.